Give me permission.
Good morning, Dr. Brad.
Good morning, Kurt. Welcome to episode 2058.
We've been having
Hit
technology
like,
problems.
subscribe, notification, leave your messages.
Brad, Zoom's decided it doesn't like Brad.
It is among good company, I'm sure.
Anyway, okay, Brad, what do we got today for warm up? Anything?
Not really. It's like the just nothing new. Nothing new. We talked good yesterday and it kind of wiped the buffer clear.
So what have I got?
Okay.
I had a question this morning that I thought would be useful for most. Be useful in putting the work in historical context.
Okay.
And so I thought I might share this screen. You should see Enlightenment Strategies. I don't know when I wrote this. I mean, back in, got to be 10 years ago now. So what I was trying to show here is that the English, because they're so obsessed with law, and this is interesting because the Anglo-Saxon law retains, but they get the Normans bring French rule to England and put in the administrative capacity of the state in French, keeping the law but putting in the administrative state. So and of course by 1200 we've got Bacon and these guys coming out. So what's happening is for the English system is very judicial, and just like in the Greek world, where they developed reason, etc., because they needed a democratic means of governance. Undemocratic is the wrong word. They needed participatory means of government between the ruling class of families. So you generate this need for essentially what we consider contractual thought, right? And the negotiation of contracts, which keeps you in basically the material world. So the English developed what we think of as, we call in philosophy analytic thinking. I would just call it empirical thinking. Yeah. And I would call the philosophical interpretation of judicial, legal, and empirical thinking as analytic. In other words, the analytic philosophy tends to be more about interpretation of language and text, which is somewhat like what happened in Greece. But what you see that happens in the Germans is, the French, who are second. I'm going to use the Germans. I'm going to use it happens with the French, then the Germans, then the Jews. But the understandable change is from scientific to rationalist. So I tend to think about. Somebody asked about that today, and I said, well, think of Kant and Hume. It's Kant and Hume, Jesus. Kant and Hegel versus Smith and Hume. Now, Kant and Hegel are both trying to create the same experience of theology in rational terms.
Okay.
They're trying to rigorously produce, migrate to a philosophical form, what is essentially a theological set of morality experience. And the most important thing is that in European, in the Anglos, they completely demarcated, disambiguated is the right word, observable thought, in other words, empirical thought, from philosophical thought, from theological thought. But you don't, just as most of what we call philosophy is really the intersection of observables and theology or mythology. The analytic philosophy is that arises out of this is really saying, how do you create what's scientifically moral? What does empirically moral mean? And you get that really with Smith. You could argue that other people have it, and you get what essentially is psychology from Hume. But what you lose in the process, is that religion is highly binding for a social group, specifically because it's emotional, psychological,
right,
and pro-social. What you get in philosophy is you get to a smaller group of people who can interpret this bridge, which is a rational interpretation doing the same thing, trying to maintain a social or experiential mode of thought, method of thought. So when you read continental philosophy, they, just like the German language differs from the English, is that it has this they call it phenomenalistic, but is really an emotional component. So they don't divorce the experience of being human from the observables. And so you get this sort of odd bridge in it. The
phenomenalistic.
Yeah, you get this odd bridge where the Anglos have completely disambiguated each category of experience: religious, rational, and empirical, to produce what is a method of thought for a ruling class, just like the Greeks produced a method of thought for a ruling class. In this sense, the Germans were producing it for more of a majority middle class. If you look at the French, though, then the French so the thing is, though, is that the Germans are the beautiful intersection. And this is why I say we've got to study the Germans, is because they get really close to being right a lot, and they still keep the phenomenal in there. So you have the ability to be bound by this. So at least socially bound in the middle class by this rationalist philosophy, and this can percolate downward. And then you can retain your theology for the working classes. Right? Then you have the French come along, and they're, of course, authoritarian, feminine, and they're mean. So hold on. So what's happening here is each civilization, the Anglo and the German, is just preserving its perception of the utility of popular thought related to a class and its method of speaking, right? Governance. So you really have Anglo empiricism, German Protestantism, and French Catholicism coming out. And so the French just take the superstition out of morality, out of the moral license, but they don't put in the German rationalism or the the Anglo observabilism, empiricism. They don't put in either one. And so what you get is this this really interesting progress through the classes. And when I say what's the relationship between the aristocracy and the peasantry in group evolutionary strategy, you're seeing this play out. You're seeing this play out in the spread of the counter revolution against Anglo empiricism. Why is it that Anglos maintain social cohesion? This is very important. The Germans maintain social cohesion. The French maintain social cohesion, and the Ashkenazi Jews maintain social cohesion using these different methods. Right. So if you get to the Jews, they're basically an underclass, and they are, they're treated as one or a separate class. And so they use they come out first with the reform of their law, which is Mendelssohn. And then they later come out with the Marxist revolution. So they come out with class revolutions. Within their own system, they come out with a legal or rabbinical reform. And later they come out with a peasant reform or Marxism, underclass reform, which is fascinating. So what I did here was I tried to map out this spectrum, even though the order is Anglo, French, German, Jewish. Was that right? Yes, Anglo, French, German, Jewish. As the spread of modernity moved from England across into Germany, from Germany into Eastern Europe, and finally it began to take root in Russia, and of course that completion of that process collapsed because Russia was too far behind by the time the world wars happened. So of course Stalin then gets credit for catching up when it would have happened anyway. Right? If they just left it alone with the monarchy, the transition to industrialization would have happened anyway. So it was really, it's sort of like in America, the transition out of slavery. We had our war over our Civil War, which was largely, at least tangentially, about slavery or the spread of slavery. We had that when if we had not, in 30 years, it would have been economically impossible to afford to have slaves. Right? Slaves would have been too meaningless because industrialization would have made them useless. So we tried it. So accelerationism is this is a warning about accelerationism.
Wait, let's just reiterate that for the audience, please. The warning about accelerationism.
It's one thing to accelerate technology and let it work through. It's another thing to try to accelerate adaptation of a population without things working through naturally. Basically, society needs to naturally transform over time. It needs to adapt.
Otherwise, it's a violent problem.
Otherwise, it's a violent problem, and it also turns out to be unnecessary. I mean, if you're saving one, in both of these cases, you're talking about a generation.
Right, and so the point I would add to that is that the acceleration is very costly and unnecessary, so it is pointless. It's a fruitless function that costs a lot.
Okay, now let's talk about what people will confuse as acceleration and correction. So in other words, it's if you're trying to accelerate a development, right?
So define development for this purpose.
Well, China's rapid increase, Russia's transition to industrialism.
Economic development.
Well, I mean, economics is just cooperation. So if you're trying to accelerate human cooperation, it has to be an adaptive process. Now you can do it through education, you can do it through, but if you just try to impose it on people, they actually resist the adaptation. because you've provided them with a forceful
Well, that's
means
it.
with, go ahead.
Yeah.
You
This is
haven't let it become incentives.
right. So this is the model I would use is the adaptation of the electronic health record by the medical community, which has been accelerated by federal monetary power. And it is just a freaking mess.
Okay, so now let's talk. So we talked about I want to advance you, right? And I want to, let's see if I hope I make this. One of the things Chinese do right is they reduce any legal initiative to a set of very friendly principles. We're going to achieve these, like the 3 rules, right? They always reduce the stuff to 3 rules, which is the equivalent of the Western concept that if a law isn't simple, it's not a law.
Right.
And so the Chinese do that very well. The problem is we see it as propaganda. Well, it's only propaganda if it's trying to make you do something false, right? Force falsely reciprocal or sound counterproductive. But when it's just like, here's 3 guys, it's like the Kantian. Kant is reducible to tell the truth at all times, regardless of cost.
Okay.
Somebody's going to beat me up for that, but I mean, in the moral sense, that's what it was. Which is just the law of non-aggression in verbal terms. So going back, I was afraid if I went down that road, I would lose my train of thought, and I did.
Sorry about that. So you were on English empiricism, German Protestantism, and French Catholicism.
Oh, and then I was talking about the rate of adaptation of the populace. So,
right.
So what you should aim to do is to create incentives that take a generation to change. People can do that, but it's because you created bait. Rather, you put the carrot in front of the horse, not the whip behind the donkey, right? So they have all the incentives, and those incentives are pretty easy. And when you're advancing a population economically, it's pretty easy because everybody wants to advance. I mean, so
right.
the European way of doing this is we just remove the English way is you don't have to advance, you just have to remove bads. If you outlaw bads, the goods, there's opportunity for goods.
Right.
You don't even have to know what the goods are. So we're sort of like the Anglo is the extreme version of the via nega approach to evolution. So we call this freedom and liberty and free trade. That's not what it means, right? Free trade is not a good thing, as I've explained elsewhere. Is that you want reciprocal exchange, free of externalities. And the problem with free trade is it produces those externalities. So you just want reciprocal trade regardless of who it's with.
Right.
And you need to do your full accounting, as one of our folks so elegantly said yesterday. So the difference, so now the problem is we have the issue of what if things go wrong? Can you accelerate and revolt if things go wrong? The problem is that the incentives to do wrong exist.
Right.
In other words, so the problem is the question is the ratio of the incentives you can provide to correct the malincentives, if you can do that or not. The problem we have in America is we have no means any longer of correcting the malincentives of the state, of the cathedral complex, the left, academy, state, media, sale of false promise of salvation from the laws of the universe. Right? They're selling this fraud out there, and we have nothing. So, like when I had Ricardo and
yes,
and Kevin McDonald and Gad Sad and the rest of us in New York, I said, we have nothing to sell. right? In other words, in a majoritarian democracy, where you've basically made it possible once you bring in majoritarianism instead of multi-house concurrency. In other words, if you did you understand? Does that make sense?
I understand what you just said.
So if you move from multi-house concurrency between the classes to mass democracy, what you've done is you've created the incentive for the top parasites to ally with the bottom parasites against the middle. When the whole point of rule of law is to push out both top and bottom parasites, so you're left with only a productive middle class. So the problem is, you can't, just like a state that wants to grow a population, advance them, needs money or debt in order to provide the incentive for them to evolve. A correction needs the equivalent. The problem, you need money or debt. The problem is, all we really have is violence. So whereas if a violence in order to get people to adapt to a new opportunity in growth is destructive, the violence to get people to adapt to a suppression of irreciprocity, in other words, the reciprocity of the parasitism by the top and bottom against the middle, that the violence is the only choice. Because that's what rule of law is. It's the organized application of systemic violence to suppress irreciprocity at all scales. Well, I mean, when you're trying to prevent individual private actors, your local sheriff will do fine. Actually, your local business owner would take care of it if the sheriff didn't. Right? When you get up to having an urban environment, you need a police force. Right? You need because you get organized crime. And when you get up to a nation, you need a militia for that scale, because what you get is organized political crime. So you go from individual unorganized crime to, group conspiracy to organized urban organized crime to national organized political crime. And what we've got today is organized national political crime. And so the only way to do that is the police system that's there can either be the king, the court, and the military, or it's going to be the militia. So the question is only if you have a king and a military who will take care of the government, or the militia. Now, the great thing is to have both.
Okay.
Because the last thing you want is the militia. Because the militia isn't an organized concentration of force to minimize the damage to everything in order to achieve your end. A militia basically has to tear down the whole infrastructure.
That's rough.
Through disorganized guerrilla means.
Well,
and what happens is that guerrilla means gets very hard to.
It's not precise.
It also takes a long time. So this is why you want an aristocracy and a military and a militia, because the military doesn't want to fight the militia, right? Right? They don't. And if it gets to the point where the military has to fight the militia, which is the individual soldiers, you're fucked. And the military, at least in our country, our Anglosphere, they don't want to do that. Actually, they don't want to do it most places. Russia is invested so heavily in it. We look at their expenditures, we don't realize that their FBI is the equivalent of our military.
Okay.
It's that big and that fully funded. And it's the same thing in China, except it's not visible. Their expenditure on suppression of, basically in both countries, of democratic activists is equal. And the problem is that the state can defend themselves by saying, look what happens when you let democracy you get this decadence and decline and corruption. And they're right. The thing is that has nothing, though, that's just Marx, race, culture, sex, and class Marxism that we haven't suppressed. That's all woke is. It's
That's
our
right.
failure to police not only our social order, but to police our intellectual and political order. And so we fail to police that, and we wonder why it's good. Well, the problem is you're going to end up with violence because it's the only remedy.
Well, it's like this. I do this vignette, and it goes like this. See, Western civilization boils down to this kernel of organized violence. And there's only two ways this thing splits into two. And on the right, that will be this one. On the right, we settle our differences via ballot.
Yes.
Otherwise, we settle our differences via bullet.
Yes.
And it's like denied the civil opportunity to settle our differences by ballot, which is what apparently is occurring. We're left only with bullet. And that is the rough militia way.
Again, the problem though is that we removed the demand for concurrency between the classes. And so what we've done, because they didn't understand, I mean, the founders understood it, but they didn't put the defense of concurrency in the effing Constitution. They structured it for concurrency, but they didn't put it in, they didn't say it.
Specified, right?
Right. It's like the common law. I've specified the common law better than anybody in history. And it's reducible to a simple science and logic. It's basically reducible. The science reduces it to a formal logic. Well, it's the same thing with, you got to have concurrency, and concurrency is what defeats democracy, the problem of democracy. So you can have participatory government, which we call democratic. You can have participatory government without having majority rule. A majority rule is a violation of concurrency. Well, what's concurrency? Well, concurrency is the classes, just like common is the regions. So if you don't have common and concurrent law, what you've got is you've just got what makes democracy fail. So our ancestors figured out how to solve the problem of scaling a polity, which is you look for commonality, which is just saying research and development has determined that the repeatability of this formula has applied in all social situations in many different contexts. Therefore, it's empirical, right? That's what common law means, right? And then you say, okay, what's concurrent? Well, concurrent is the via positiva version. It's like, well, we've determined that this is concurrent across all regions and all classes. And so all you have to do is every time you add a class, you have to maintain concurrency. Well, but they didn't. They undermined concurrent common natural law in order to create what they said democratic legitimacy, which would have been just as legitimate under concurrency. But what they did is they removed concurrency and they try to remove commonality. Like
they're trying to establish via positiva legislation as well.
They're trying to establish authoritarianism. You may call it, may not be totalitarianism, but it's authoritarianism. It's top-down rule rather than evolutionary rule. And so this is why they can cast out all this nonsense, these positive laws of forcing adaptation. It's the same thing with the blacks. They destroyed the black community, which had a higher rate of nuclear family than whites. They made more progress toward equality prior to the Civil Rights Act than they did after. Because when you force things, you produce a counter-revolution. Whereas if you leave incentives out, people just follow incentives. We all get along fine as long as you let the market, meaning you let people make their own effing decisions. So it's just, and so they wonder why, we adapt so fast. Well, because if you have a generation to adapt, you can, right? And you do this by incentive and suppression, but you don't do it by force. Anyway, did I make my point there about participation, commonality via negativa commonality, and via positiva concurrency? Did I make my
I think so.
My point there? Okay. so that, and I made my point that there's a difference between oh, it's okay. And I didn't tie it together that your attempted acceleration will actually multiply the time necessary for adaptation, if not reverse it. We're just letting natural human incentives work will usually fix a problem in a generation. So you're saying, I would say, so you're going to use, instead of having letting slavery play out for 30 years because it was already in the process, right? Right. You created a civil war that destroyed the American experiment and killed 500,000 people back when there weren't that many of us, right? So you destroyed all that to accelerate. Yeah. Now you got to ask yourself: is the million or two people that were enslaved at that time, that accelerating them by a generation, or just sending them back, which was more costly? We're still dealing with this fucking problem now because of activists, accelerationists.
Yes.
And if you just lay the thing out there and create the incentives, people will do what they want. But then if what you do when you force it is you take away the incentive for the party that needs to adapt, right? So if the peasants in Russia needed to adapt, you took away their incentive to adapt. Right? The African Americans, Black America, needed to continue its adaptation, which was going full force. They took away their incentive to adapt, and they destroyed their families, and they destroyed their middle and elites. They did the worst thing possible by trying to accelerate 30 years.
You're talking about the Civil War.
I'm talking about the Civil War and the rights and the civil rights nonsense.
Okay.
Now you would argue, and I know if Martin and Eli were here, well, that was the point.
I would argue that's the point. Certainly,
the point was that they weren't trying to help the the people who were adapting. They were trying to harm the adapters, right? The people that were adapting to.
The interest is power, seeking power and authority, justificationary. It's just a justification.
All right, so let's go through the Enlightenment strategies.
All right.
The obvious one is the geographic, right, which is the first one in bias. You have a naval Anglo. So again, like Germany is an army or land power. So when you have Germany is Sparta, England is Athens, and America is Marines, Rome, right? And so you get these three, and we're just repeating the same process. Generally, what occurs is that a land-based power in history, the cycle is a land-based power attempts to exert its growth, like China is, like Russia is. And they feel very confident because they have a very powerful military. But the problem is trade creates more alliances than military power. And so what happens throughout history is the people who are dependent on navy and trade ally against the landed powers and kill and destroy them. This is the general cycle of history.
Yes.
So today we still maintain the American Roman Marine, the Anglo Navy Island, the German Marshall Land. The French is actually an urban. France isn't France. It's just the egoism of Paris, the way Russia is the egoism of Moscow. This is a wonderful illusion that gets created in these cases by urban centers. Is they have an extraordinary privilege by the discount on opportunity costs made possible by population density, and they just assume everybody else has worse morals or different morals or different understandings of human nature, when in reality, what's happened is that the opportunity costs in different environments, in different population densities, requires different individual levels of individual responsibility and different distributions of power. Whereas in a city, you can have a concentration of power, and because you have a concentration of opportunities, and you have the gradual diminishment of individual responsibility. Whereas the more sparsely populated, you get to the point where you have individual responsibility for your group, to the point where you get into the steppe or the desert, and that you can't produce a commons, so you have individual responsibility limited to the family and tribe, clan. Did you follow that? Because it's really important.
Yes, it has to do with the density of opportunities.
The density of opportunities create the demand of responsibility.
And we mean specifically social opportunities to cooperate.
Yeah, what I mean is the production of commons, right? So the problem is when you and I say commons, you and I both know that's the full spectrum of demonstrated interests.
Right.
When most people hear commons like the Boston Common, that's like a park we could do our cows. I'm like, well, yeah, but I mean, that's just like the landed example of it, right? I mean, ethics, morality in a group is a commons. Language is a commons. This is why we get pissed off when the liberals change the meaning of terms, because a term is a weight and measure that's used by the commons. So essentially a liberal is trying to lie by putting his or her finger under or above the scale of any given measurement. And when he or she does that, you decrease the legitimacy or the cooperation possible by altering the weight and measure that's used by the population. So what they say, well, we're doing that for good. No, you're doing that to lie, period, and you're using lying to do it.
Right. We agree with one another there. Stunning. I guess it's appalling, to be honest. It's just appalling, and it's justificationary, and they really believe it to be true, what their lies are.
Without taking too much of my awareness of the severity of this problem has gone off the charts lately, why I'm posting so much about it on Twitter, which is that I've been posting that whites are the most advanced civilization because we have the most abstract thought. Right? It's just, and we have that we can just say we developed it for accidental reasons in history, but it just happened to be true. And so what happens is if you look at at cultures, and Piaget did this, if you look at cultures, and there's a bunch of other researchers, and I'm going to use Piaget as the guy who coalesced all this, is that what you've got people who think like children, people who think like youth, people who think young adults.
Okay.
People
It's
who think
developmentally stratified.
It's developmentally stratified. And so adult thinking means you can think in abstractions. Essentially, what I love is I didn't see this before. I mean, when I read him, it was, I was probably back in the 90s.
Right.
And so I didn't see it then, but he uses the term operational.
Okay.
And so you either can think in these terms, which is a merger. I don't think he says this, but it's a merger. I hope I can say this without confusing her, of the concrete and experiential with the abstract categorical. What that means is you've reached parsimony by discovery of first principles that not only describe general rules, but can be applied to specific circumstances.
Okay.
Right. So essentially that's adulthood. So you just see
do that, because that quote is worth capturing.
So in this development of civilizations, you have very childlike civilizations and some young adult civilizations.
Hmm.
The problem is you have some feminine civilizations and you have some fully adult. And this is the problem, is that if we look at these civilizations and we look at what's happening, is there's no sense of logical consistency. There is some sense of consistency, but there's no sense of logical consistency. So the infant's consistency is me.
Right.
And this just evolves with the consistency. Well, the top of that is commons.
Right.
That's what abstract has to mean. So what I've learned and I've confronted with, and it's just it's one of those things that's making me more and more agitated every day as I see it more, as what we call feminine thinking is actually child thinking, because it's consistent in personal emotional experience, just like me of the infant is consistent in personal emotional experience. So what we're doing is they have the personal emotional experience of youth, or maybe mother, it's young femalehood.
Okay.
They don't have the logical consistency, which we think as abstractions and commons. In other words, abstract thought consisting of first principles that result in the production of commons. And now I'm back to, okay, well, you're right, women shouldn't be in the voting pool.
Wait, who's the you in that song?
Oh, it's like all these. I mean, even some women. You can ask a smart woman will actually say that, because too many women are crazy.
So we'll abstractify that a little bit, because it goes to, it's like this.
Well, I mean, don't let me dig myself out of the hole I intentionally jumped into, right? Which is that's what concurrency solves.
Okay.
Right. So
how that works.
What?
Explain how that works.
Well, I mean, if women have a house, right, they can't.
So you say women's suffrage in the women's house.
In the women's house.
Their own house. They get their own house.
And we need to have a house for the classes, and women are a class.
Okay, so I understand this. This is radical political reform, because you just go like this. You go, all that women's suffrage thing's just not working out right at all. Just went sideways on us.
Well, the problem is they claim that it has, but it has nothing to do with them at all. Matter of fact, everything that has to do with women has been harmful. The things that the reason we're better off isn't democracy. It's actually the technological innovation and system of thought that were evolved pre-war. Everything, yes. We're basically spending down everything we learned from 1600 to 1920, 25. We're spending it down. We have made progress, but it's disturbing how little progress we've made independent of those discoveries. We've made applied discoveries.
Yes.
Have we made any theoretical discovery? We haven't figured out physics yet, for reasons we talk about, at least I talk about every day, which is patently obvious. So I mean we haven't. Oh, it's exasperating. So anyway, now you can go back and correct me. Now that
I'm not trying to correct you.
Help me dig myself out of the hole.
Well, no, it's like this. So I like the solution, which is that it's not so much that the mistake is it's multidimensional. It's not that you let the women vote, but you let the women vote in a system that doesn't demand concurrency.
Yes, and that men are widely distributed and they vote distributedly, right? But they actually vote logically about the commons. Women don't. They vote emotionally and they vote about experience. It's okay if you want to measure experience,
right,
and look for and try to achieve concurrency by trades, in other words, reciprocity, between the houses.
Right.
But if you can't achieve that, what you've done is you've just done what democracy always does. The women are more narrowly distributed. They're less logical. They're more empathic. They seem to be unable to, at least most of them, comprehend systems, even comprehend them, or comprehend that they're inconsistent.
Right.
So what you're saying is we should let children vote. I see. You didn't think I was going to jump back in the hole, did you?
Wait. Since they can figure out their gender when they're born, why not?
So anyway, if they're gonna, the thing is, the test of whether you're an adult or not is whether you can systemically think and abstract thoughts that produce commons. That's the test of an adulthood. So, basically 2/3 of men can do that, and just under 1/3 of women can do that. So this is the problem, is that the women buy it. The women take the women are enough to skew the population towards inconsistency, devolution, and suicide.
That's what. Okay, I understand.
And then they go and say stupid shit like, "But not all women." I'm like, you dumb fuck. How can you possibly say something that fucking stupid when we're talking about the distribution of all women, not all women? You don't. How can you be that fucking stupid? Right? I mean, I've actually.
I want you to say that. I want you to know. I was chatting with my dear wife last weekend, and it was like this. And I said something very similar, and then she neck salted it, and I go, and that's the proof in the pudding, sweetheart. And it's like this, and she didn't like it, and that's okay. It's like, what's funny is that so the justification of the modification of the language is that
What?
the justification for the abuse of the language commons
Yes.
is well, that's what people are using now. That it's like a democracy. It's like a damn democracy. It's like, yeah, no, it's not a democracy. That word does not mean that. They can misuse the word, but it does not mean that because they use it in such an abusive fashion. It does not legitimize it. Does that make sense? Well, yeah, it does.
So the interesting. So again, that temporality is a form of irresponsibility.
Yes.
But it is also a form of empathy. In other words, it's short-term thinking, right? It's not thinking about commons. I don't think
disregarding the commons. It disregards the commons, and it costs the commons to allow this to drift.
Correct. It's okay if women and children do stupid shit, because it's not going to impact the social, political, and economic commons, right? It's going to only affect their feelings about them, things like that.
Yes.
So what the way I've been trying to struggle with how to reframe this question, which is women say the way they look at it is if you want consistency and logic and commons, you're increasing my burden of policing others' reason. Adaptive. It's basically their adaptability. So I don't want to be responsible.
All right.
Okay. I don't want to be responsible for people adapting. I'm willing to be responsible for my children's adapting, but they don't actually mean that. They mean my children's not creating problem for me. That's what they
mean. That is true. It's like because they're annoying when it's extra work when they're making those squawky noises.
So they're always avoiding responsibility. So when I say the fundamental problem of a female is that her entire wiring is bent on evasion of responsibility for anything that's rational, and limiting herself to responsibility for that which is felt by empathy. So she doesn't have the control over wanting to care for her children. That's a purely mechanistic.
Right.
Her only use of reason is how to use whatever's available to her to solve that problem. And so, but it's not responsibility. Responsibility is rational as well as intuitionistic.
So is there equivalent for, okay, we got rational, responsible pairing.
Yeah, I think I overstated
emotional, the empathic equivalent of it's caring.
Yeah, but it's not caring, it's a blame avoidance. So, it's always the negative stated as a positive, but it's fear avoidance, blame avoidance.
Right. So it's emotional rationing. It's emotional rationality is feeling regulation of feelings, or right. It's the yes.
And so
it's
they're
like
wired to be irrational.
Go ahead.
They're wired to be irrational. The only way they develop into rational is once they've have enough kids that they have to start making rational decisions. In other words, when they can move from empathy to commons production, and commons production is across the population of their children, that's why women with lots of kids turn out to be grown-ups. And women with none or one turn out to be fucking children.
You called this temporality.
Yeah, short-term thinking, temporality, high time preference, whatever, whichever frame versus temporality versus intertemporality, short-term versus long-term, high time preference versus low time preference. Same concept, different disciplines.
It's poorly syncretized language between those disciplines.
Right, and that's why like I said, that's why it's so important to have a universal, universal commensurability across all the paradigms, all the disciplines. Once we know the first principles, such that we can create a single paradigm. The people that's going to be hardest with are mathematicians, because they don't know they're talking nonsense.
That was particularly rude. I want to thank you for that.
Well, I mean, it was like I was talking to I think I said this the other day. I was talking to my friend the other day. Well, like, I mean, I said, it's a woman. She says, she throws in all these feminine. We used to have a really good guy at this. I can't remember his name on Facebook. He's a psychologist. He was really understood Freud and Jung, and he understood our model, all three.
Okay.
And so it was really great to talk to him because he could explain all three positions. And fortunately, I lost him once we went off Facebook.
What is that? Well, look, do please return.
They will let me. I'm permabanned.
Oh, I'm talking about the
the other guy. Yeah,
the fellow to
can't remember his name.
Increase the communication.
I was thinking while I was talking to her that the whole the reason men in particular don't like therapy is the premise that underlies the vocabulary. In other words, the paradigm they're using. And I'm like, most of us guys, we don't have those feelings. You can teach us to translate what we feel into your terms, but that's not what we have. And I'm like, you just keep talking about being afraid of others. We're not afraid of others. We're just frustrated in our ability to act. Right. So they have this very neurotic psychological frame. Whereas if you look at the terms they use, which are all effeminate.
Okay.
And like the terms like vulnerability,
Hmm.
I mean, that's like a stupid term to a guy, right? There's a whole bunch of, they just have all these, I'm like, it's not about vulnerability. It's like, because we don't have the feeling in the first place. We're just frustrated, right? That's all. You just, it's because frustration is a positive. I'm trying to dominate, to do. But all this fear shit they talk about, this neuroticism, is submissive. And like, we just don't think like that. And the reason is, I think so many guys who need therapy don't get it because no one talks to them in terms that don't make them feel disgusted.
Oh my.
And a lot of therapy is essentially the equivalent of the priesthood, what the priesthood needed to be in the old world, is
Yeah,
the people
yeah.
you go to for advice. Well, they would use these metaphors to program you by suggestion, but Christianity is basically a submissive religion. Whereas the army does the other way. They put you in an indoctrination camp, and you learn to depend on the other guys and ignore your feelings. Stoic.
Right.
So I'm thinking about, I've listened to her and I'm like, the reason guys won't go to you is because if you had said that to me, I would have felt a disgust response, because you're calling me a fag. I mean, I'm sorry to use. I mean, I don't know if that's a prohibited word on YouTube or not, but I mean, I was using it in the context of my youth, right? So I mean, you're calling me effeminate, and I'm like, I don't think like that, right? It's like the women who teach school, they ask boys how the character felt in the book. He's like, I have no idea. Tell me so I can lie back to you that I do. Right? I mean, we don't have those feelings.
Wait, and I don't care.
And I don't care.
Don't know, don't care.
Feels don't matter.
Not in this house.
Well, I mean, you wonder why our boys are fucked up and they don't care about anything.
What's that?
You wonder why our guys are all fucked up and they don't care about it. It's a war on masculinity. And so I'm just thinking about this. And so this problem is, it's like innumeracy, mathematical Platonism infects every discipline. Well, so does this psychology infect all these disciplines. What if you did psychology the way, in other words, if I converted every term and concept they use in psychology today into masculine and feminine variations, just like we've converted masculine and feminine methods of persuasion and lying and antisocial behavior.
Yes.
Right? It would be way easier. First of all, you would end this whole feminization shit. And it'd be way easier to get men into therapy, which they need because feminists destroyed all male organizations where we provided positive male reinforcement.
So it's not so. It's interesting. So I'm processing the information because it's like a what has occurred is this forced assimilation of all into one house, and then the weaponization of the children to control the adults, which happen to be mostly males. And it's like, so it's like a watercolor that's bleeding through all over the place and destroying the imagery, because it's like it's impossible to maintain the proper resolution on the problem sets that we face using this method of decision making at this scale.
Right. And again, can I reinforce that? What are the three things they said? They want the authority of a man and the responsibility of a child. What are the three things? Authority of a man,
What is that from?
It's the three things one want.
Okay.
the power of a man, the privilege of a woman, and the accountability of a child.
Both women to
Okay.
And so accountability, let's see, he's got something wrong there. It's the power.
What is that?
If that's the wrong word,
It's not the right word, right?
it's and it's missing responsibility. They want
They don't want it.
well, that's right. So he says accountable. So they want the influence and agency of a man,
Yes.
the privilege and consumption of a woman,
Yeah,
and the irresponsibility and unaccountability of a child.
that's right.
So and so again, what are they doing there? And then your thing, it's just like screwing with me because I can't get over it now.
What's
which is
that?
my conversion of this, which is want to noise making.
Okay,
Right?
what does that mean? So what am I gonna try to understand? How is it messing with you, man?
Because for me, this is equal, gender independent, the sex independent. I want. We're
Right,
negotiating, right? We're negotiating under that word. But you changed it from men are negotiating to women going, tweet, 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 tweet. And I'm like, you ruined it for me. You absolutely ruined it. Another thing that I got to look at women differently, and I fucking hate it.
Sorry, Kurt. I should have said destroy one more sacred cow that was lurking in the backfield there somewhere. He undetected. I found him and killed him right in front of you.
You know, I said this. We should go back and this is one of these guys is creating these topical clips from us where they go to all the videos and pull
That's
out.
cool. That's cool.
Right? And I just this responsibility will end up there somewhere. But I used to say that back when I said this market for affection, which is the thing I was experimenting with before I went to Ukraine. I was thinking about working on this topic.
Yeah.
So I was saying back then I was saying, look, if I write about fashion and art and relationships, I get like 1 million views. Right? And if I write about law, I get 1. It's like maybe 10.
Yep.
So if I write about economics, I get like 50 or 100. But the most popular thing I've ever written was when I said tattoos went out of fashion. Right. And that was the most popular post I'd ever written. I was right. Is that they went out of fashion, at least in the middle class, upper middle class. And so it's the same thing here is I said, the problem with the way women think in the short term and they can't systematize, they think they can move this side of the scale and this side won't go like this. Right?
Wait. And you know what they'll say? Here's how it goes. We'll go like this. Who could have foreseen that?
All of us? Any guy? Your 14-year-old kid? Probably a 12-year-old boy.
Oh, it's like, and act surprised when it happens. Like,
I said, so you gotta, and this began to bother me when you guys made me look at the manosphere last fall, and I was like, it's about a year ago. About a year, yeah,
it was about a year ago.
I said that I don't think women get it, that all they're doing is teaching men how evil they really are. And we've built centuries of ways of making men and women work together in a fairly reciprocal fashion in the West by creating all these rituals, right? And the dating rituals and the flirting rituals and the dances and whatever. These are very equal ways of men and women meeting. They're because they're started with the aristocracy and they push down. So we've developed all these upper class, then upper middle class, then middle. It just worked its way down. We created all these rituals for to create the family as the central, and responsibility as the central. The criteria for adulthood was to be married and have children.
Mhm.
And once you're married and you have children, you're considered a responsible member of society, because now you're as equally in need of responsibility as the rest of people.
Right.
But what's going to happen is men are going to realize how awful women really are.
Yeah, no, the mask is off, kids.
And it turns out, with the thing that's been surprising to me is men are actually pretty good. They're bad, but they tend not to be evil.
That's interesting. Now I'm looking this. I looked up
Women are
Malleus.
evil. Then I don't know if they're bad, but they're evil. Men are bad, but they're not evil. Women are evil, but I'm not sure they're bad.
I'm going to ask for a clarification of that after I tell you this tiny little vignette, which is I became interested in looking up Malleus Maleficarum,
Yes.
the hammer of the witches, and it's like there. I was reading about the book because it's for the audience. It's something about like written about 1450 or something like that.
1480.
It's like, it's to get rid of the witches, and it's like it's witches. Maleficarum is witches, female bad actors, not maleficorum, which is male bad actors, because the church recognized that women are intrinsically more carnal than men, which is less abstract, right? And it's like so anyway, that's that story, and it's like I have a copy in my house somewhere. I can't lay my hand on it yet. I'm looking for it. Anyway, I diverted your attention.
The put women on a pedestal thing is an artifact of the Victorian age. The Victorian age was so severe because the Edwardian age, just like now, was so decadent. And so, of course, in my view, the Victorian age is the high point of Western civilization. So, the truth is, through most of history, women are considered the root of all evil. And the reason I say men are bad is because we'll do violence and stuff and theft and stuff like that. But women are fucking seditious and treasonous.
Right. So I want to evil, not how I'm like using your language as a metric, like calipers, right? How do they become evil? How do you register them as evil?
The harm without benefit. In other words, the intent to do harm without obtaining something material in return. Right? So it's bad to do, or it's immoral to commit a property crime.
Right.
But it's evil to bait someone into hazard.
Wait, so it's bad? Say that again, please.
It's really simple. If I whack you on the head, right, I steal your shit,
right?
Bad.
That's bad and evil. No, it's not.
No, it's not evil.
It's not evil. It's bad.
It's just bad.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Whereas if I set out to undermine a civilization, your institutions of law, that's evil. It's your purpose is to destruct, not profit or gain. Technically, you can't profit from a theft. You can only gain from a theft. Be precise with our words here. We legitimize theft by calling it profit, but it's just gain. You're not profiting.
Because otherwise it's merely an enterprise.
Crime is an enterprise. Profit comes through an enterprise.
Oh my. Okay, so harm without benefit. So they qualify as evil, but how do they not qualify? They're not bad because they're not gaining.
They're not gaining.
They think they're gaining.
Yeah, they think they're gaining. That's why they're evil. And I say the devil is a woman.
I know. Because
that's how he works, by sedition, by baiting you into hazard, by making you by seduction. The devil's female, and our God is male. Our God is male. And our gods might be bad, but they're never evil.
I know. And now
Right?
you got me
And
thinking
you're
about
Indo-European.
Ishtar.
What?
You got me thinking about Ishtar again.
We're gonna. I feel like this conversation. We're gonna be burned at the fucking stake someday.
Betas, man. The betas organized under the banner of Ishtar.
Yeah.
And look, you think about Babylon as a beta civilization that it's just so attractive. It's like the men in the hills with the bronze are sharpening up, get ready to steal it from the other guys that are alpha guys that have gone soft. And it's just we are tasked. It's like lightning. It's like the attraction is so great. It's baiting me into hazard. In fact, the betas probably invited us in so that they can have good relations with the new alphas, right? It's ready. Total baiting into hazard. It's seduction. It is Ishtar. It is female in its function.
Right. So
The empire.
So just for the people who don't know, so every civilization has a founding mythos, right? And most of Indo-Europeans have like the something to do with cows, right? And brothers, right? And so, but we also have founding parables.
Okay.
Like one of the symbols is in Europe, you see the green man coming out, the face coming out of leaves.
Yeah.
We don't even know where that comes from. It's so old.
Yeah.
Right. It's probably the same origin as Enki. Is it Enki? Enkidu? Enkidu, yes.
Okay.
All right, because that's what Enkidu represents. But from that green man, we get elves, and from elves, we get trolls and fairies, and the whole fucking smear, the whole spectrum of them. Well,
Yeah.
same thing for the blacksmith and the demon. Now, what's interesting is what our founding parable is: a cattle herder, and our founding mythos is of the good, right? The sky is has got cattle, right? Cattle herding, and our founding parable of evil is the blacksmith and the devil, the cattle herders and blacksmiths. Why would a civilization have those two founding myths? Why would a blacksmith instead of some wandering prophet, right? I mean, why would you have that? That insight is really interesting on its own, that those two things tell you. But anyway, you know the story of the blacksmith and the demon. The demon is that the demon comes into the blacksmith and he offers him so much time, wealth, and prosperity. I'm conflating them all together now.
Yes.
But wealth and prosperity over some period of time. Well, at the end of it, the blacksmith tricks the devil and welds him to the anvil. All right, so he goes off, continues on. So think of how much dominance is in that concept.
That's right. We supersede the defeat of nature, right? Like
you can be tempted by the demon, right? But you can also defeat it. There's no submission in our fucking history. Nobody submits. Nobody goes in our mythology. You don't submit in our mythology. You fight and you win, or you die.
And yes, that's how it is.
But it's not
how we do it. That's how we do it.
We're not a victim of nature anymore. So anyway,
Right.
Go ahead, right? So I like this. And even the elves and whatever, the spirits, the elves, the spirit
That's
elves,
right.
they're trying to screw you up. It's basically an analogy. It's an analogy for the stupid shit we do because we're forgetting.
That's right. That's right.
All right, and the spirits are meant, like some of my favorite surviving Celtic myths, the really old ones, the pre-Christian myths. The spirits are there mostly to encourage women to take care of their fucking households and not be lazy. That's really, and so there's all these spirits that will do things if you don't keep a house.
They're doing tricks right now.
It's just
Right.
fucking hysterical. Anyway, so I was going down the blacksmith and the demon.
Yeah.
I was going there for a reason.
Founding parables.
Yeah, but I was going to founding parables for a reason.
We were talking about why are women evil and not bad, right?
Right. That's
And it's
because
a responsibility.
they're seditious, not violent. They're seditious and irresponsible, not violent. Seditious.
Irresponsible, right? Okay.
Now you'll say this like this is a great example, but you look at all these guys, women who pay their bills and men who don't. Well, you say, okay, evolutionary reason for this, right? The woman is afraid of nonconformity. The man is afraid of not taking enough risks in order to succeed.
It's pretty true.
And if you look at women who form investment groups versus individual males who invest, the women will often do better because for the same reason is that they're looking to not fail other women in the investment pool. They're not trying to defeat other men by superior returns and cunning. So these behaviors are, I mean, they're demonstrated universal, but that's different from responsibility, right? So there's now that man by taking risks is trying to develop responsibility for commons.
Explain that, please. That's interesting.
So risk taking is an ability for you to demonstrate competency
Yes.
in order to generate influence, which allows you to be responsible for commons, right? Which could, or women for that matter, be able to get a woman, be able to make allies, and to gain responsibility over capital, and to produce capital as a commons. I think this whole conversation has been an interesting example of how frequently you have to use serialization, right, of a spectrum in order to make sure
To make a measure out of it.
make a measure out of it, because by making a measure out of it, you actually are sure you understand it. Whereas if you just have an idea and you can't turn it into a measurement, you have no idea what you're actually saying. If it's even a vague analogy, if it's wrong, right? It's like you throw these things. It's like I just said profit. Profit was a great example. Are you profiting? You're profiting from a trade, but you're not profiting from theft. You're gaining from theft. But profit is the difference between costs and returns, right? So if you made a profit, that's a productive question. You can only profit from a productive act. But if you go steal shit, that's not productivity, because it's not reciprocity. It's just gain or taking. Your ill-gotten gain.
Yes, I understand. I appreciate that. It's an interesting function, because I'm pondering it, because I'm like, you have stolen from the commons because or not the commons, but the personal effects, and you're damaging the commons as well when you're stealing. So you're
lowering somehow, maybe by a couple of grains of sand, the trust that's in the commons. And so every time you do that, you think of it this way. Think of it as simple words. When I grew up, I used to go to work and throw my keys on the floor of my car. I don't want to lose them in the work.
In the tumult of the day.
I could just reach in, pull my keys off the car. Nobody or people you used to do it above the
yeah
right,
yeah.
But I would just throw mine on the floor of the car. Right? I'd leave my windows open, the whole thing. Nobody's going to steal a car. This is fucking Western New York State. It's farmers.
Yeah.
Right? We didn't lock our door. I didn't stop locking our door until one of the freaking guys got out of the military asylum and tried to get in the house one night just to get warm. Right? I mean,
I understand.
Because
okay.
So you live in that kind of world. So what's the cost of what's the cost of locks?
Yes.
What's the
cost? The locksmith too.
And the locksmith, and what's the cost of the police that result from having it, and what's the cost? I mean, you add up the costs, they're quite significant.
Bastiat's broken window.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, okay. But I find it interesting that the men are seeking to make sure they're willing to take enough, they're taking their chances, their risk-taking behaviors. And it's like you will feel less of a man for not having taken the risk.
Yes, you feel
Because
lower.
you're like, you don't not trying, you're not seeking to profit.
And so you think women aren't trying to be responsible, they're fearful of being caught. Men are trying to take risks in order to gain responsibility, because that's what status means. It means, for a woman, status means opportunity for consumption. For a man, status means opportunity for responsibility.
Right.
And you have private.
Wait, so responsibility versus what's the women what they want? Consumption.
They want consumption. So the negative and the positive. So this is why, okay, so there's just a whole lot of my work I don't enjoy.
Sorry. Oh my. What about it? You mentioned that there's a whole lot of your work you don't enjoy. What specifically stirred you to say that, sir?
So in my life, my father was an asshole.
Okay.
He was a very competent man, but he was an asshole, right? And I got a lot of fights with guys as children, right? So I'm surrounded by women. I had 2 sisters, my mom, my grandmother.
Okay.
And so in my life, my mother and my grandmother are extremely positive role model influences.
Right.
So that's, they're also about as puritanical, despite being French, as you can get. Right? They're old world, old fashioned, responsible, raise your kids to be measure society, right? So the problem is that they were products of the Catholic Church's indoctrination.
Yes.
And products of the war eras.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were very they didn't look at the world as missed opportunity, which is what today's women look at the world like, as they don't want to miss an opportunity. Whereas their world was, I don't want to experience a risk or a harm. And so
risk avoidance,
right,
versus this is yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm reflecting on my just studying the manosphere myself, and it is the behavior of the females is they're absolutely they've operate with a sense of self-abandonment.
Yes, well, it's irresponsibility, as if there's no consequence. There is a consequence, of course, and it's the consequence is the commons. Well, the problem is guys are adapting, and and thanks to Rollo and all those other guys that did their early work, because they went into it for the wrong reasons, right? They went into it to improve on
get some more on the side.
Get some more on the side. And what the minute they did, they're like, wait a minute, these women are fucking horrible. and so the reversal of that image is what's bothering me.
The reversal of what image?
Women are good, men are dangerous. To women are evil and men are merely bad. Right? And that reversal to me, that actually men that produce all the good in society, and they do it just so they can get laid. And so what?
Wait. This is like this. It just begs the important question: can you think of a better idea?
No.
And it's like, what a way to organize a society. That works, man. Because it's like this. You got the engine that works, man. That one is like motivating.
It succeeded everywhere in the world they applied it. So I mean, obviously it's the best. It's the best model.
See, so it goes like this. It's like that's we have shorthand for this, okay? In the my business associate and I, and it's like this. That's because women have the primary currency, sir.
for some for price. However, just as I use the example of Athens discovering the silver mine and destroying themselves through the resulting stupidity of wealth, and Spain being a proper European highly disciplined moral culture destroyed its culture by discovery of Latin American silver or gold.
Oh my.
They destroyed their economy.
It's
because they destroyed-
amazing that it's like for that goes to the hard currency guys, right?
Yes.
It's like that it's possible to do that is just amazing.
Yes, exactly.
It's like wow, right?
You destroy your culture by an oversupply of a good whose regulation is necessary for the production of the culture itself. Right? I mean, so they produce an oversupply that actually shifted the behavior of the population long enough for it to adapt, and it would not retrench. Right?
Can't. Just blew it up.
So now you have, because it's the hardest thing to produce is discipline and reduction of consumption. So what they did is they maintained their same favoring of consumption instead of work, and you got Spain, right? And which is despite right, and so you're seeing that happen here.
That was rude. Like that one was rude.
They don't deny it. It's not like like we're Mediterranean. It's warm.
Okay,
We got
this
fruit
place
on the
is
trees.
beautiful. It's
We have
beautiful.
wine. We have sex. Life is good. What else do you need?
I know you crazy Germans.
Yeah. The Germans aren't next door. Yeah, I guess that's it. So anyway, then you get the same thing in the female. The females have done this. They've created an oversupply of a good that's the primary means of social regulation of cooperation between the sexes. Well, what they're doing is flooding the market with pussy. Flooding the market with sex. And so it's happening.
Super saturating the solution, man. And it's like
And so there's no reason for the best males to marry. There's no reason there's no reason to
it's
obtain
stupid.
status by marriage. And so the consequence is we continue to decline in rates of reproduction among everybody other than conservatives, which means the liberals are breeding themselves out of existence. And if we separate from them by secession, we can make them go out of existence, which will save us 10,000 years of evolution. Did you like how I went down that? I was just trying to see if I was just trying to get there and see what would happen if I said it.
Oh my. Wait, so it's like it goes to hang on. Gotta get the name right. I'll get the name right now. Then I'll say my quote because it goes to a meme, okay? Margaret Sanger was right.
I don't know.
Margaret Sanger founded Planned Parenthood.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, they did it for eugenic reasons. They did it. I mean, that I don't have a problem with abortion. I have a problem with the government avoiding concurrency and commonality by on a matter which is undermining the very institutions of the state and
Yes.
our court by violating concurrency and commonality. So it's not that I have a problem with abortion. I just think it's like, wait a minute, we get to choose that
that's correct.
by concurrency and commonality. The market between the states will determine the long-term viability of that thing. And some states will be proud of their suppression of abortion. Now, some states will be proud of their use of it. Eventually,
Right.
it'll form some equilibrium.
That's right.
And then at some point, I would suspect that the evidence will make abortion fairly common, except in certain localities which are spiritually against it. So, I mean, but that's what concurrency and commonality mean. It's an important distinction. I don't know if I made that. Commonality
Yes.
is via negativa result of the empirical evidence of resolution of disputes in court by means of property. Concurrency is an agreement among people of different classes and regions on doing something legislatively. Concurrency and commonality.
That's it.
Normally what we try to do is we try to develop something through commonality and then codify it. In other words, you might have 5 really close solutions that have developed, and those 5 are basically common, but they have minor variations. In order to scale it, what you do is legislate. In other words, you take the 5 things that have developed organically, and you find out what's common between them. Okay, this is all we really need, and
Right.
then you codify it, and that becomes common, settled common law. But settled common law is an evolutionary process.
Yes.
It's not a declared process. It's a discovered process. So the problem is positive law, which assumes
Yes.
you're fucking smarter than other people.
Oh my God. No, so I
You know,
think
I'm a pretty smart guy, and I don't go around thinking we should do. I don't say stuff like we should have about abortion or homosexuality. I don't say shit like that. I'm like, it's a problem of commonality and concurrency, and the market will calculate the proper result over time. Okay, let it do that. What's a great thing about a federation is that you have room among more states. The more states, the better, for some people to fuck up and some people to get it right, and then correct each other. The problem you have
sort it out.
monolithic state, right, is if you legislate something, it's very hard. There's no evidence to be created of the broken window, right?
Yes.
The thing about a broken window is in economics, it means that when you break a window, you stop the guy from buying the suit he was going to buy, right? And it goes to the glassman instead. Well, so what was the cost? Well, the cost was the glass and the glass man and the loss purchase of the suit. So the same thing happens when we talk about authoritarian via positiva law, is that if you make a mistake, A, it's really hard to correct, and 2, the evidence doesn't get produced of the alternative. Whereas if some people say we're going to have gay marriage and we're going to have abortion and we're going to have what's the bathroom thing, trans bathrooms, which is completely out of your fucking mind. We're going to have that, and I'm like, okay, well, you're going to see if you have competing jurisdictions, you're going to see the evidence of the failure of those propositions, and you're going to see some evidence of the success. Now, if you said to most people, homosexuals can have legal partnerships as long as you don't call it marriage, right? Which is basically, there's a difference. A marriage is an insurance by the community against non-interference in the corporation called a marriage in order to prevent the negative consequences to the community of a separation in which we're so stuck with women and children who the community has to care for. That's the reason for marriage. So now, well, let's put it another way. Besides the fact, if you do interfere in that, it's the most likely reason a man will kill you. Right? So there's 2.
That will make me
We're going to
laugh.
prevent.
We're
We're going to kill 2 birds with one
murder.
stone. We're going to have this thing called marriage because men will kill over pussy, right? And I know how the only times I've been dangerous when I've been drunk. I'm like this when I'm drunk, except I'm even more ridiculous, right? That's all, right? But I thought a guy was hitting on my girlfriend, and that was not a good thing.
Not a happy dude.
I was unhappy with my limited ability to control myself in that circumstance. I mean, I just wanted to kill the guy. And so, and it was actually, the thing is, it was innocent. They knew each other in college and they were just talking.
And that's okay,
Well,
right?
she's super hot, so I mean, what am I mean? of
I
course-
understand. It's like, I get it, man. It's like good. It's just what's interesting. for
If
me,
you're
I mean,
drunk enough that you lose that I mean, I'm pretty self-regulatory, but if you're, I was like, wow, and that's the same. And normally if I'm in a relationship in my rational adult mind,
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
fuck it. If you think you're gonna get somebody better than me, go ahead. It's not gonna work. You know, I'm in there.
Right. That's not.
I'm not that
can
arrogant.
happen, right?
I'm so profoundly arrogant that
Right.
I don't-
No, it's insecurity is not my problem.
Yes. If you threaten to hurt my wife, I might kill you. But I mean,
Oh,
you know,
that's fair.
I mean that's normal.
You don't
But
feel,
especially,
you don't
like
have vulnerability. Huh? It's like,
like I beat up this kid because this younger kid because he beat up my sister, and I beat him up on the porch in front of his mother while holding the door closed so she couldn't get out. Right?
That, my friend, is artful. That is artful. I'm
He's
gonna hurt
screaming
you.
at me through the screen door.
Yeah,
You know, the screen door with the aluminum gate on it,
Yeah,
the whole thing, right, all frilly. Or
Yeah.
iron, whatever. And she's like screaming at me.
that is a legendary beating right there, brother.
And it was purely, he picked on my little sister.
I
I
understand.
didn't think about it. It
No,
was just boom.
That's necessary. This is just necessary. I have to do this. It's just a responsibility.
Pure animal instinct.
That's right. So yeah.
Anyway,
So what
so
does that mean?
how do we get into this ridiculous?
No, it's good. It's good because
And
it's
we can definitely take an incredibly sophisticated intellectual argument about the life, the universe, and everything, and reduce it to dick and fart jokes. If we,
right. So this is it. The issue is it's positivism as opposed to evolutionary discoveries.
I'm going to call it arrogance, because that's the difference between liberals and conservatives. It's basically empiricism versus utopianism. And so the difference is your appearance like, well, you know, run an experiment and we'll see.
That's right.
Liberals are like, no, let's get it done now because we're right. Is that an example? It's the female mind, right? That's the immature mind.
That's it. Okay, so we go back to this risk taking. So this is good because it's the betas. They're risk averse, and they're arrogant, and the masculine beta is a socialist, and it goes to the Glenn Beck conversation. Even if I can prove to you it can never work, he says, well, we have to try, because he's going to risk all your shit.
That's right, because he's not at risk. This is why I say, if you're going to have participatory government, you know, they talk about this Greek model, but you realize that's a small number of people and they're all voting their own pocketbooks.
Yes.
Right. And so, I mean, if you're going to have participatory government, great. Have it by votes for norms, and have it by money for expenditures. Right. And people so in other words, there are different. Should we do X socially is different from should we do X materially.
Okay.
And so what you should do, hopefully, is run tests and see. And we ran tests on what's the thing they want to have, universal minimum. And everyone's been a catastrophe.
Income, universal
income. It's a catastrophe. It can't work. So the reason is not enough people pay enough taxes. This is important. It's a very small percentage of the population that pays almost all the taxes. Right. And so, and I keep saying, well, just keep a public record of who pays how much taxes. And then on on some matters, you want to have it be a majority decision, which is a social question. And on some matters, you want to have it be a financial question. The financial question is who's going to pay for it. Now, the way they work it today is that you can vote a really stupid thing in your local community and it ends up as a property tax. So you can act irresponsibly and place that vote it onto your property for the next person to have it. Whereas if it were your debt, you'd be a lot more careful about what your community invested in. You would separate things of material value from things of policy value.
I like that.
And so the whole, all I'm doing is saying government should be, every government that becomes successful fails at the point where its systems, its infrastructure systems, its knowledge systems are no longer sufficient to run the state up empirically. And so you say this in every, China's the canonical example, but we're in the canonical example. We're becoming the canonical example.
I got distracted.
This is the problem of money having too much money. Is too much money, too much debt allows you to operate the state unempirically. Whereas if you had to operate the state empirically, think of the venture capital firms in Northern California as a country, because they basically operate as one. If the government is in the business of trying to make wealth, right, they can collect the returns on that wealth, and they can use it for the production of commons. But if a government is saying, I'm just going to attack you fucking anyway, then there's no incentive to do the right thing. So what you end up with is all governments become parasitic and extractive, and then worst of all, they become self-fulfilling.
It's the feminine bias in that group.
Right. So go ahead. In China, they went from an originally empirical government to what we consider a moral or Confucian government. And so what happened is that's where you get people passing tests by drawing pretty characters.
Mandarins.
That makes me want to shoot myself.
I understand you. That's like I got lost a little bit because I was pondering this the distinction here, which is and I'm tying it back to the earlier part of the conversation, which is this utopian arrogance is associated with accelerationism and the short time preference.
Correct.
Which is we gotta get it. It's for the kids. You know what I mean? It's like it's emergency all the time, right?
An inability to think as a system, and an impulse to consume rather than produce.
It's impulsiveness. That's good.
So think of it as production cycles. You have a short-term empathic production cycle and a long-term systemic production cycle. What's the difference between them? It's scale. The difference is, what's empathic scale? Of course not. That's why the left is always wrong. They can't imagine anybody thinks or feels different from them. Which is what a child.
Which is why they project.
Why they project. Because they're children. They're cognitively children. That's the part that's, like I said, he's asked me, what is this bothering you? This is what bothers me. Wow. I want us all to be, I just want to right now, I just want to pick up a Bible, go with some happy young Christians, wear a white shirt and tie, go to church every day, and just be around nice people. Or find a bunch of hippies somewhere, and I'll wear a floppy hat, an oversized shirt, get really fat, smoke a cigar, make some paintings. I mean, I can paint nudes all fucking day that'll sell. I get to look at hot chicks. I mean, I did that for 4 years of college, 3 hours a day. One more nude chick. And of course, Nancy Hoffman, who's a radical lesbian feminist, brings in ugly gay women for us to draw. And I'm like, I'm trying to.
That was right rude.
I'm trying to withhold my urge to gag while drawing some of this one. So I just started drawing animal heads, like I drew this woman with a frog's head, because I just couldn't stand it any longer. Made the whole because the way you do it is like, you got the easels, right? and the bottle's up there.
Sure,
And
sure.
so she's got to hold for like a 45 minutes and then
Right.
go right or 20 minutes. It's actually pretty hard to
I can
model.
only imagine. Yeah. It's
And
tough.
so they, so and then Rudy Zallinger brings in male models that are godlike, right? I can't remember this one. I can't remember his name but he's got like the beard and his every sinew.
Right.
It's not like a massive guy. It's more Greek because he was more was less bulky. Anyways, you draw this guy, and he can hold some weird position or an athletic position for 45 minutes. It's like, I'm a little tired now, but he could do it, right? You draw that guy, and it's like, wow, I see that muscle. I didn't realize that muscle did that, right? I mean, you could do that, and then you got Nancy Hoffman bringing in some fugly, absolutely fugly woman, and she's probably getting as a job so she gets sex on the side.
Right.
Oh, the better one is Rudy Zallinger. No, I don't know. I got the names wrong. Rudy Zallinger. Rudy Zallinger is the guy that painted the first dinosaurs in color. Like if you go to the Yale museum, they have you saw the Time Life paintings of dinosaurs. That I had him for a painting and drawing teacher, and cool. He'd bring these fucking ballerinas. And it's like, I'm trying to like make sure I got jeans on that day because my dick doesn't get hard. And I'm looking at
the reflex. It's just
I know Rudy. And I know this man, right? I mean, he was spiritual. He was one of those people that you just you say, I wish I had his emotions, right? Because he just looked at life that way. Yeah. He's like, shit, I get to teach art and look at hot nude chicks all day. And I get to sell waterfalls.
Is there anyone you think you can improve on this?
And he made a living out of painting New England waterfalls.
Nice.
He did illustration, but that was what he sold his paintings as. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you get this really weird combination of the ballerinas who, like, you're getting aroused. You can't help but it's like, I'm a man. I can't. I'm 19, 20-year-old man, and you're putting the hottest possible chick in front of me.
The bait, man.
It's just fucking cruel. And then, you have like this guy, I can't remember, with the sinews, right? And it was like, okay, well, this I can deal with. I can learn about musculature. I'm kind of envious he's that fit,
Right.
And then you have like the other end, which is Nancy Hoffman bringing in these fucking ugly chicks.
So rude.
Jesus Christ. And I'm just like, So I mean, like, there's a bunch of. Can I really take it to the king? Because there's a bunch of lady parts that don't look good if they're.
Oh my! So it goes to this. Ready for this? One of the jokes in med school is like, "So what are you gonna do?" It's like the man joke is they want to be a GYN. I'm like, oh no, because that it's nice when it's nice. It's so not nice. It will make you never want
to see one again.
Of it. So that's the story. Just so you know.
How did we get on this? I'm obviously okay. We're 2 hours in. I'm obviously trying to lighten subconsciously trying to lighten the. Because I've had to do formulas for the past 2 hours.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to go back to finishing our diagram? Do you want to continue on a certain thread there you have going?
You diverted me. It's this policing of the commons, right?
Yes.
The policing of the commons. And it's like this. I think that we have to, as a group, collectively police the lingual commons.
Yes.
Because we have to tell you that is a misuse of that word. That's inappropriate. And you, just because somebody wrote it in their stupid book, your stupid definition that you want to legitimize doesn't make it so. It means you're an idiot for trying to do it with me.
It means you're a criminal because you're engaging in loading and framing, and loading and framing is a deception. So you're engaging in loading and framing is a deception in order to distort a system of weights and measures that allow the value of the calculation, computation, and valuation of human discourse. So what you're doing is you're using sedition undermining, by informational destruction, by altering the weights and metrics in order to perform coercion by suggestion. See, I don't talk like
That was good. That was
I
well
try
done.
not to do that too often.
That was freaking awesome. I like it.
No, because if I let myself do that, I would talk exclusively like that, and everybody would go, "What the fuck are you saying?"
It's all right.
Gotta
Now,
pause. You gotta slowly walk through. I notice this when I'm watching our videos. I slowly walk through some things that don't need to slowly walk through, and then I
you fly through the other
I
one.
fly through some other things that need to be going on. I got to figure out intuitively what I need to carefully enumerate something and when something's obvious. And I have I don't know why I have that problem because
Well, you see, because it's like this. It's like you see it as you're fast forwarding through something you have gone through 100 times that's so obvious to you that you presume it to be obvious to everybody else. So you just gloss over it. It's like, and you get quieter and faster as you do it because you just kind of, and it's because you're like, we need to get across that barrier to the next thing. This is just a little boom. That's what's going on because I see you do it. And I'm
I
like,
just wish I had the intuition because I look at myself and I'm like, I'm talking very disciplined and very calmly and very deliberately about this. And I realized that didn't need to be calmly and deliberately stated. It was obvious, right? And then I'll go through some goddamn thing that's like I just did, which I can't even remember what it was. And I just plow through it. And I'm like, I'm saying it because it's obvious, but it's not obvious at all.
I understand.
I just, this is what, when I say that I'm envious of professors, I would hate the job, I think. But what I admire about them is you get in this position where you're preaching to a class. So you develop this tempo, you develop this voice. Because if I were going to speak into a microphone that was here and it was loud enough, I'd speak in this range. When I've got to project, I talk in this range. Right. And so what you want is you want to talk in this range with amplifiers and you want to be and then you want to speak at a measured pace. And who was I listening to yesterday that was making me crack up? I was listening to a professor yesterday. I was listening to one of his, and it was like he had memorized a passage from Shakespeare and was delivering it. Right.
Nice.
And so with such weight, and of course I don't, I talk like a businessman. Somebody should, what's his name? Oh my God. Naming a necessity.
Hanging with you.
Necessity.
What is it? What are you looking up?
Just looking up the philosopher's name, which is Saul Kripke. So Saul Kripke didn't write a book. He just gave a bunch of lectures.
Okay.
And it was profound. He's sort of the end point of the philosophy of language. And so the whole Wittgensteinian thing sort of terminates with Kripke.
I've got a question for you.
Sorry?
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
So in this, you've caused me to be inspired in terms of if we were to seek out training in this verbal expression capacity, who would we seek? Like what professional would we seek? Some kind of voice coach, some kind of theatrical coach, you know what I mean? A rhetorical coach. Does that make sense?
I think it's a matter of just, I mean, I'm sure if I just watch 10 people and I took speech in college, right? I mean, it's not like I'm afraid of giving presentations.
Right.
It's when you're in this topic, I'm an observer.
Yes.
I have to talk, observe, and do at the same time.
Yes.
Because I'm narrating by talking what the observer sees of what I'm doing.
Yes.
Right. So my intuition is doing something. The observer is trying to turn it, is trying to see what's going on. And then I have to turn around and then say, okay, this is how you speak it. And the problem is that chain, there's like this, who's working most now?
Right.
And so I think that's what's happening is that
Oh,
This is
your
what I-
attention wavers.
my
Your-
attention moves between the three spots, and so I think that's what's really going on. The reality is that if you ask me to talk about things that I've said 100 times, obviously, I could go over all of truth, reciprocity, and the functions of the law, whatever, and I can do that. But we're like, and I can do that in normal oratorical fashion, like any
Right,
like right now, I'm using my teaching voice, right?
right.
But when you and I are working, I'm not using my teaching.
Oh,
voice.
yeah, that's a whole nother, that, because you're having to emphasize the working part.
Right, and so because a lot of what we're doing is I'm trying to write proofs for things that are a novel application of whatever is we're talking about, and so that's what's going on, and my attention goes back and forth. What I admire about the Jewish speech, the method of speech, is they don't seem to have the intermediary problem, as it seems to be present, and so they can go from, and I think that's because they think verbally. I think that's because their thinking mode is feminine and it's verbal. And so they have, that's what I think is happening in the Jewish mind. It's fundamentally female. So you combine a higher IQ with a depression of empathizing and a minor increase in sympathize and systematizing, and they're able to speak without the intermediary factor. What I notice in a lot of people who are not quite as far up the IQ chain as I am is I see them switching. I can listen to them and I can see their brains switching, and so they look for a packet and they come back and say it. They look for a packet and then they come back and say it. And they look for a packet and they come back and say it.
Interesting.
And so one of the values that the storytelling model has is it produces a context that is easier than testimony. And so one of the advice the problem is that Europeans, we speak in testimony, male facts. And if you look at the people who are best ethnic European speakers, they will take a storytelling approach. The storytelling approach provides enough context that you don't have to switch back and forth all the time. So like, I can understand what's going on. I think I would have to, I don't know if I can do what you and I do with this mode. I don't think I can do it because I'm focusing too much up here.
Yes.
Anyway,
Okay.
Because
What it is, it's just an interesting function. I'm asking just because as a
well, it's just an interesting way of
Right.
understanding the difference between male, female, Jewish, and European methods of both cultural and biological speech.
right.
Is that it comes out and you're like, well, why are Europeans better at this category of things and Jews are better at this category? Well, it's the same reason women are better at this category of things and men are better. This because it's two kinds of thinking. And you got to realize that the verbal method allows you to use more resources of auto association while you're narrating at the expense, and so it's just easier. The problem is that it's harder to calculate, systematize and calculate. In other words, to test the facts of operational sequence. So anyway, I don't want to get into this in too much, but it is interesting, and it does apply to the diagram that I started out this discussion with. Is that why are there really only two intellectual elites here in the world? There's intellectual elites from Europe, and there's intellectual elites from European Jews, but there aren't any intellectual elites. And what's the difference? You have the European Jews, the Ashkenazis, are a mixture of European women and Semitic men. Europeans are a mixture of people like me, which is European hunter-gatherers, people like Martin, who are steppe people, and particularly Martin look a little more ancestor North Eurasian, and people look like you a little more steppe, and so we're this admixture of things, but our women are all people like me, which are all almost exclusively hunter-gatherers. So something happened there, because what we see whenever people think race mixture is good, but it actually, you can see the mental defect increase with the racial intermixture. you could see an increase in crazy. Because it's quite difficult to maintain stability in a population if it gets, in other words, error correction in a gene pool decreases as reproductive population. So there's like a stable equilibrium between a large enough population to prevent inbreeding, replication of error, and a small enough population to filter out error. So in other words, there's a really nice utility program in the population distribution. You don't want to have a global universal population. It's like states. You want to have the ability to run experiments and fail,
Right.
correct and succeed. Same thing. So the thing that
So
applies
it's an error correction process by selection bias.
correct. And so you can't have too small a population, but you don't need that many. It's like 1,500 people. It's not a lot. You don't need a lot of people. I mean, I've read different estimates by different geneticists. I'd like Robert Reich. If Robert Reich would come out, it's not Robert, whatever, it's Reich. The geneticist, right? Anyway,
I don't know who you're talking about.
I want him to answer the question so I can have confidence in the question. But there's you don't need a very large population. If you have a small population, you're more likely to produce excellence over time. And if you have a larger population, there's a point at which you have a large enough population to compete effectively. There's a point at which you have a large enough population that you're becoming sufficiently heterogeneous that you can't error correct. One of the values of Europe is that we had not only small populations on land that is impossible. It's possible to concentrate to farm, but it's not possible to concentrate to flood river valleys. And meanwhile, it's not possible to get big enough populations is that you can continue selection process. And so what happens if you add bipartite manorialism, you not only get greater selection, the economic selection for behavior, and you've not only produced cold weather population regulation by selecting for temperament, neoteny, but you've produced the incentive to produce commons as a norm instead of to produce family plots as a norm. So you end up with all these good things completely by fucking accident, right? And it turns out to be a really good selection process. You get a similar thing in East Asia with rice farming, but there's something about that culture that doesn't.
It's an interesting function because rice farming is fundamentally different than the practices in Europe.
I think it's because it's a 360-day year a job, and farming in Europe isn't.
I think so, and it's like this because the European system allows for diversification of activities,
yes,
roles, and responsibilities, and the winter time gives you a lot of time to figure out what to do better.
You're in a small. I sent this picture out of a typical Scandinavian house the other day with the ring around it for the fence and the house. They are actually built close together, right? But so and I'm like, you're gonna live with 6 or 8 or 10 people in that fucking thing all winter long.
Yeah.
Right. If you're an asshole,
you're going outside.
It's also there's no room to be one. Right. There's no, I mean, you're constantly pressured by the group. And the other thing is when you have that many people around, you're not so burdened by independent thought. Like you don't have to keep yourself amused. You think about that, right? If you're sitting alone in a room, you got to think of shit, right? But there's like 12 people in the room with you and you're eating and sleeping and fucking and everything with them all around you.
Right.
There's just like this din that makes you feel safe. Right?
That's right. It's the bustle of it.
You don't feel the need to be dominant or I mean, just because you're not unsafe.
Right.
So you think about that. Now you think about what happens in a really hot climate where people they can come by all the time easily. I mean, we got this thing about don't walk on my land, because if you do, I can kill you, what I mean? Right, it's like, when you live in other places, that doesn't always exist, and so there's all these selection pressures that we sort of reduce to, is this person good looking? I mean, it's not like that. It's like the whole fucking spectrum of behavioral traits gets selected for. It's like, who do the really thick people? Hawaiians,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
They selected for that. They thought that was good. Right? Okay. Well, we selected for gracility. We had horses, so we selected for height. Because the bigger the horse, the bigger you got to be. I know, because I hit a barrel rider, and boy, I'm way too short for a little Amanda on this goddamn
Giant horse.
Hanoverian. No problem for her. Me, I'm like, Jesus, I don't know how this thing keeps me on board. Anyway, I was going to go somewhere useful with that, and I have forgotten entirely. So I was going to go back.
Evolution is where you were on.
Well, so evolutionary pressure is just it's just all over the spectrum, and so excellence in any given area might be different. I mean, why do we think we know why Asian people look Asian, right? I mean, but we certainly know why European and South Eurasian people look Europeans look European, and South Eurasians look European. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of extraggression from the we've had a lot of introgression by the extragression of the Middle East during agrarianism, and we had a lot of introgression from the steppe, but those people were already mostly European. So you end up with these things. So in Europe, we sort of have all these colors and sizes and shapes across the spectrum, but you can still tell a European from a non. But I mean, before the agrarian revolution, Europeans, South Eurasians, Africans, and East Asians looked as different as Europeans and East Asians do today. So this hybridization. So that's why you see these 4 primary races, which are adapted to the 4 continental regions, 4 continental climates.
Yeah. And
then you see hybridization of the intermixed cultures that border each of them. So you get the Turks, right? There's very little Turk in the Turks. They're Turkish, they're Mongolian, there's Iranic, there's some European, right? So they've got there's some Caucasian. So you see this whole spectrum, and then the people in Turkey, they're not even Turkish, they're Greek.
Right.
And God went through Greece with an ugly stick, and he took out his rage on man.
That was sufficiently rude.
It's just, that's all I kept thinking about the whole time I was in Greece. Jesus, there's a lot of fucking ugly people here. Excuse me for being an artist. I'm sorry, it's true. Anyway, sorry, I shouldn't have gone there. Anyway, it's not like we don't have enough ugly people in America. We got some real humdingers over here. So anyway, now that I've buried myself, I've jumped in a hole, dug a hole within the hole, and jumped down into it and buried myself. Maybe I can go back to some adult conversation. Is that all right if I?
That would be all right.
Should have stopped earlier.
Sorry, Kurt.
So anyway, you have Anglos, who are a naval civilization. Because they're a naval and traders, they tend to be universalist, right? We tend to have a broader concept of what norms, traditions, values, etc. should be, because we have to interact with a lot of people. The method ended up being empirical or scientific. I don't want to explain this one. We call people, I guess we can. We tend to say to people, you've made an error or you're wrong. or that's an error. So it's a via negativa sort of way of the work, right? We
So it's
call
an error correcting.
it's error correcting.
Okay.
And that's important because it's actually value neutral, which is part of this and this, right? So this construct produces this construct, which encourages trade, which produces this construct, which produces negotiations along these terms, which leads to a political order that's, again, contractual in those terms. It means, and since contractualism produces egalitarianism, the problem is that if it brought to an extent, it's suicidal.
Wait, I don't understand this.
You
How do-
can't, whenever we try to colonize,
Oh,
we fail. We can replace, but we can't colonize because constructing this adulthood in a population is extremely difficult. Think
Okay.
of what you've got, what we had to do in Europe to produce the high trust rule of law, egalitarian society that we did. We didn't produce equalitarian, which is egalitarian, which is basically commercial.
so the result is suicidal. Is why do you pose it in such a fashion? I don't understand the result.
Because you expand to the point. I mean, the Jews did it. You expand your interest to the point of maximization of your opportunities for collective private consumption at the expense of the preservation of commons that give you a homeland, etc. So the Jews did it too much, and they eventually became diasporic. The English have done it and became diasporic, but this ethic we have is the same vulnerability you see in Americans. And so it's been, what happened is the Jewish diaspora came here with race Marxism. They took advantage of amplifying that neutrality.
Yes. So that's a suicidal. That's why you call it suicidal. It's like
Right.
it's because it's got to be not insufficiently self-defensive.
It's insufficiently nationalistic.
Okay.
That's the problem. Is the minute you produce, the way you can tell is the minute your middle class is internalizing costs for the external production of profits, that's when you've started to go wrong. That's when I say when free trade occurs, that's your problem. You don't want free trade. You want reciprocal trade. And reciprocal trade means there's no internal cost to the external trade.
Okay.
Now, what the economists tried to bring about is like there are trade-offs where it's no longer valuable for you to produce cotton. And so you should send your looms over to Portugal to produce cotton, right? And instead we'll produce wool. I don't know, something. I don't think it's probably the other way around, wool and cotton. We'll stop producing wool, start producing cotton. Whatever, it doesn't matter. The same looms that were being used in Europe in the 1800s or maybe even late 1700s, certainly they're out there in South Eurasia somewhere, because the looms follow the wage rate that's necessary to produce the price the market was willing to pay for the good, right? In competition with other goods. So when you look at this question, you're trying to say, well, yeah, but that's only true if otherwise we're equal. That would be like Texas and Oklahoma can engage in offshoring, so to speak, between states within the same federation.
Yes.
Because their higher purpose, their defense, their culture isn't dependent upon that, and the knowledge retention could be reversed.
Right. It's not. It's maintained. The integrity of the system is maintained.
Correct. The same thing would be true in most of Europe. Like if France or Belgium does, or France or Spain or Germany or Austria does something, or even Poland, doesn't make any fucking difference, because your strategic need is the same, but and your cultural needs are about the same. But the minute you start saying I'm funding an enemy, You've right. And so what America did is a mixed version of this. They funded people through export of jobs and export of income. Americans did this in order to raise people out of poverty so they wouldn't be attracted to communism, which would be self-destructive to them and to the global order. So so you can nationalize, which is what you should do, which is rule of law. You can federate, which is what the Americans tried to do, strategically bearing internal costs in order to obtain discounts in war against the communists. Or you can offshore, which is what happened in the Chinese, which is we exported talent, jobs, income, and technology to an enemy. And so it just depends on what's your relationship with the external party, and are you fully accounting for costs? As someone said the other day again. So basically what you're saying, Kurt, is it's the broken window, is that we're doing the logic of full accounting of costs.
That's it.
Like, well, in one level, that's probably the right way, just as operational language is a full accounting of speech. Right? I mean, it's a full accounting. We're doing full accounting. We're creating measurements.
That's right.
So so in that sense, I think I've probably got the point across that free trade is a baddie. Reciprocal trade, in other words, unregulated reciprocal trade, is different from reciprocal trade, fully accounted reciprocal trade. Like, it's pretty hard to argue with sharing shit with the Chinese and Hong Kong and Britain, right? I mean, it's just, or Canada and Mexico at this point, right? I mean, it doesn't matter because they're not enemies, right? But they're still, but when we go over to other places, to Mexico, and we import immigrants, those immigrants is lowering the wages of our service and working classes, right? So that shouldn't be happening. Whereas we want those wages to increase, and we want prices to increase because those wages have increased, because that will direct our consumption to those things that are maintain relative equality between the classes. But the minute we send stuff somewhere else to do it, if we're doing it because there's nothing to gain by retaining it, like sending wooden mills to some third world so they can make T-shirts, where we have computer operated mills is the wrong word. Looms. Computer operated looms. It just makes no fucking sense to not sell them to them because they're going to do fine, right? And our looms are cheaper than theirs. But when the minute you do it because their labor is cheaper, right, and you're offshoring jobs,
you're being Spain then.
You're being Spain. So we don't want to do that. The thing is that the way, like I said, the economics and the government are run for hyper consumption and hyper taxation at the cost of the middle, working, and lower classes. Then what they do is they blame this suppression of wages and an increase in inequality on capitalism, when it's actually the government's pairing with the financial sector instead of, right, and the government's allowing free trade rather than reciprocal trade. Whereas if we fully accounted for everything,
right,
which is,
I know it has to do with it because it's like you're siphoning off capital and in the form of the commons,
right? So the Chinese do what I'm talking about. They just do it badly, right? We could do it not badly,
right?
The Japanese are doing, like usual, they're doing everything right. They're happy to blow up debt and have a flat economy if it means they can raise their position in the world to where growth doesn't matter. At this point, growth doesn't matter. They're happy to offshore robotics and then produce the robots. In other words, offshore things that can be produced by robotics to poorer cultures. So as long as while their population decreases.
Right.
Well, it's good for Japan's population to automate and population decrease. It's good for America to automate and population decrease. But the government isn't letting that happen because the government isn't here to help us. It's here to profit for itself. That's why you want nation states. There's homogeneity of interests. And that's why you want to get rid of Marxists, because they try to undermine they try to create universalism in poverty rather than universal wealth in adversarial competition.
Very
Okay, did I go too far now?
No, I'm like this. I wanted to look at the bottom part of that because we haven't quite finished it. So the media new print, what does that mean?
Well, we had this began really with a printing press.
Yep.
Right. And so it's more useful if you look at what Greek writing and Roman roads, the distribution of Semitic Abrahamic religions. Right. If you look at that, that's the analogy. So before then, it was very hard to move around.
Right.
And it was very hard to produce a common intellectual
Right.
language.
Right.
Somebody's going to say that's not really true. These languages, well, I mean, okay, great, but the evidence is that most of the stuff got eventually written in Greek. It got consolidated in some version of Greek, right? And so Aramaic or whatever came in there too. But I mean, you
Right.
get all these. So I mean, the end result is the same. When I'm trying to talk about infrastructure changes that allow communication increases and migration movement of people. Well, the Germans have a very interesting view. They're, of course, landed. They feel defensive. Their attitudes were surrounded on all sides. They are. Instead of being scientific, they were rationalist. Why? Because they could maintain the balance between morality and empiricism because they had a higher concern for group cohesion because they were defensive land culture instead of a universal naval trading culture. So I'm trying to point out how this is all logically related to the needs of the group given their circumstances.
Right.
Their organization is what we call social democratic, but it's balanced. They really still have an aristocracy. The aristocracy is interwoven with the government. They maintained those aristocratic relations. In other words, Germans looked at Angela Merkel as most people would look at a king. Right. She's in charge. She knows what she's doing. She's done pretty well. And there's sort of this class structure thing has still retained. The result was that they've become hyper competitive. It's like every time the Germans decide they want to do something, they're really fucking good at it. It's for all those reasons. They chose philosophy instead of science and empiricism. In other words, they went from religion to philosophy, and they maintained the relationship between empiricism, factual empiricism, individualism, and the social and emotional and psychological needs of philosophy and religion. It's very interesting. This is why I think I have to live there to fully tear it apart and I've read a bunch of books on it and I have a vague understanding, but I want to be able to do to it what I've done to other authors. And a lot of their authors started out being from religious. The French urban society, they were reactionary. They're trying to overthrow the aristocracy. They killed their middle class, right, with the purge. Then they killed their aristocracy. So they produced,
it's just like such an awful story. The whole story is just a tragedy.
That's
romantic tragedy, right?
France is the origin of bad ideas. That's what they do. It's like women. I wasn't really going to say that, but I threw that out there just to see if I could get you to react. All right. So they're Rousseauian. They became moralists, experiential. Rousseau's a fucking pervert, right? He's a very bad human being, but they just bought into that nonsense, and it's utopian. right?
Oh, yeah.
Utopian moralist. This is rationalist, this is pragmatic, and this is purely scientific, commercial. So what we're seeing here is a sociality question. Look at this content, right? So we're looking for factual errors among trade, where trade is the culture itself. We're finding a balance between, in order to maintain sufficient social, moral. We're trying to. They're trying to create the Bible, the equivalent of the Bible in philosophy.
Well, it's like to maintain group cohesion, to have a proper defensive structure
Correct.
and competitive capacity.
And so, but how did the French deal? They did it with ridiculing. The justification and ridicule, and it's very feminine authoritarian. It's the motherly, not paternalistic. It's maternalistic. It's not paternalistic in the sense that I'm trying to produce these things. It's maternalistic, and it's trying to produce these things, which is so what they did is these people, we sort of got the absolute nuclear family, they got the nuclear family, they got the traditional family, and they got the pre-family. Because I mean, Jews didn't become monogamous until, I don't know, it was after 1500, I think. So I mean, the Irish became monogamous in the early 1800s. So
it's
that happens when the family has enough property and is normatively accepted well enough to become your insurer, because the community has become an insurers. But over here with the Jews, they had to insure. They had a community so strong that insured all its members. This puts less pressure on the family itself and more pressure on the community. But it's also not landed. So whereas these people have that landed aspect, these people have the unlanded. And so these people produce commons, which are material, and these people produce commons, which are emotional and psychological. This is why they get in trouble all the time. So the French method of persuasion was literary, and the result was devolution. In other words, they went back to, they have a secular version of church rule in France, whereas the Germans transitioned from church to secular rule, more basically aristocratic rather than authoritarian. And they did that by developing a system of argument that facilitated it while retaining the social cohesion of it. And the Anglos, I mean, really, our social was basically the monarchy and culture and trade as our thing. When people come to America, I try to explain to them, well, the reason we're like this is because the American culture is based on trade, commerce. It's not based on religion or that kind of identity, and that's what we have in common is commerce. So when you say people talk to each other as if we're all customers, that's because that's what good nature is in our culture, is treating each other as customers, because our culture is fundamentally commercial.
Right.
And the Jews, of course, they went from being the people who were stuck out on the fringes to the people who could finally form a weak monarchy for a while, who were eventually not able to produce commons sufficient to hold themselves, and they eventually tried to, if they had just said, okay, we'll sacrifice to the emperor, that's fine. They just wouldn't do it. And so they had to go to his diasporic people. Their objective is to produce a world that's safe for a diasporic subset of Jews. Their method eventually moved from a theological to moral, legal, and now it's pseudoscientific. The pseudoscientific revolution really begins with Marx. They start. My argument is that they looked like they were doing fine with escaped me. I said it earlier. I forgot already.
You did say it. I don't remember.
And they with Marx they become pseudoscientific, and so that's why I have this big list of the Jews and their Anglo and their European equivalent, and the Europeans are always using empiricism, and the left are always and the right Jewish are always using pseudoscience. Their method of argument is undermining or deception. Going off. Baiting into hazard is really the feminine technique of baiting into hazard. They're trying to create, they're the authors of positive law, and they were managed to get positive law into France. So the positive law is going this way, and the common law is going this way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Again, their religion, what they do is they undermine the host population, and they do it under plausible deniability. Their result is the destruction of the host population. They're able to do this through mass production of the popular press, popular authors. So it's it's really if I go from masculine libertarian, we go this way, and if I go from masculine right, the authoritarian, we go from a German this way, and if we go feminine, we go the opposite direction. And so this is feminine, this is masculine. So this ends up being our triangle, right? The top of the triangle, the right of the triangle, the middle of the base of the triangle, the left of the triangle.
Right, I understand. Correct.
All right. So my
Nice,
point.
and that's going to be in the book, yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I have this, again, it's another of those problems. How do I explain something before you know enough to understand it?
Right.
Is that people hear me talk about the current crisis, but we went through the Anglo crisis, the French crisis, the German crisis, the Jewish crisis. We're in the Chinese Muslim crisis, and it looks like Modi is bringing back the Indian crisis. So what's happening is this problem, just like Greek reason, is this Anglo-empiricism, rule of law, the modern state, individual responsibility, commercial majoritarianism. That's working its way across the planet, just like bronze did, just like iron did.
Yes.
Right. Just like shipping did, boats, just like the spread of Anglo-empiricism did across to Germanic, to Slavic, to Russian, and it's sort of like just like the Bronze Age exploded out of Mesopotamia. The modernity sprouted out of what I would say Lotharingia, which is northern France, Germany, the Netherlands, and England.
Right.
And what happened is that Lotharingian Enlightenment, right, which is the commercial restoration of natural relations within the European peoples because of their territory, that exploded across the world, and we're still dealing with it. So the fact that I'm picking on the French law, the Jews law, is just because we've already picked on the Germans, we've already picked on the French, we've already picked on the communists, and the difference was they were outside, but the Jews are inside. So the problem is that if they were doing their methods from Israel, it wouldn't matter. It would just be like China or whatever. And Jews and Israel are allies, right? It's the same thing. It's a commercial technological culture that values high education. But they're really bad at commons production, whereas because they believe silly things. And so then we have what we have, because the Jews are here in the West and they're using the same means of sedition by false promises and pseudoscience or the feminine method. We're sort of stuck here because we've developed this thing and we gave our women the ability to become enfranchised, assuming they'd maintain European feminine ethics. And what happened was the Jews came in with their false promise, and it didn't work on our men. They tried to, but it didn't. But what happened was once they switched from class Marxism to race Marxism to sex Marxism to cultural Marxism, women bought in, And since women became the dominant member of the dominant population of the academy and all the non-sciences, meaning gut courses, they're basically going to church for indoctrination into the Jewish method of insurrection. So people are saying, well, I'm not like, if you want me to go back in history and talk about the English did wrong, the French did wrong, the Germans did wrong, the Russians did wrong, the Chinese did wrong, the Indians did wrong, this, I can go through every fucking culture and tell you whichever ones are wrong. But they're not the problem of the moment. The problem of the moment is the unification of Jewish introgression and female bias, because we hadn't sufficiently protected against female means of criminality, social superpredation, and undermining and treason and sedition. We hadn't defended against it because it came, the introgression came at the same time as we liberated our women to be able to participate in economy and polity. Those,
I will point to I don't regard any of this as like accidental, okay? It's like this, it's like they liberated the females for a purpose. They encourage them to be like they are in this at the very early stages and make them seek and encourage them to seek suffrage.
Well, no, I don't. You can't say that because that's you can't. That won't look. The suffrage movement, which what's her name? Aunt Susan B. Anthony was from Mike, the town I grew up in.
Yep.
So she's like a local hero. We got all the Susan B. Anthony stuff. So that movement is purely logical, which is the Industrial Revolution has kicked in, right? There's no need for women to be excluded from the workforce, right? And so if you're saying equal rights, that's great. They want to be in the workforce. They want to have the need to vote. Well, there was a lot of debate among women. Women didn't think women should vote.
They were right.
But this is part of the Christian movement because this movement begins in the Puritans. Okay. Well, if you think the highest, most disciplined, hardworking Protestant, Anglo-pop and Germanic population, the most advanced majority middle-class population on Earth, and you say, okay, we should give this up to women, assuming all other things remain equal, it sort of makes sense because they're not any different from the men. Right? But that say the assumed general could be expanded from a specific. So even women did. I mean, there was a lot of debate over whether I don't know if there was a lot of debate about women in the workforce. I don't think that was the big deal. Women voting, there was a lot of debate over, and it's that we've run the experiment, and it turns out that it's been a failure. Now, women wouldn't think it's a failure; they're just wrong because the time frame for the feedback loop is just too long to tell. It's only showing now. But if you say instead, women should be given a house of women so they could negotiate with men, like they had negotiated to form a family, I would think that would work out. If we had said that you have to have the same merits as a man in order to vote, which means you have to be the owner of a property and have children, then I think it would have worked out okay too. But this universalism, that's okay if you're a majority Anglo-Saxon or purely Saxon, Germanic, Protestant, Northern European culture who's basically if you're not working, you're sinning against God and even then you might go to hell.
Right. There's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee, right? That population probably could have done it because they were already the most advanced population, but in this sense. So that makes perfect sense. But I mean, the problem is you open it up to all women, and all of a sudden, then you bring in the Jews who have they've taken the female evasion of responsibility for the commons to the nth, to the power of 10, because that's what Jews do, right? They go from they're what's his name? Who's your friend there? The theologian,
the professor
Michael Jones, that they call it revolution. It's not revolutionary, it's undermining. Because what they're looking for is the evasion of responsibility for the production of commons. And furthermore, Their ethics says it's okay to profit from imposition of costs in the commons.
So it's like
Not
this
only
is
okay,
like
it's virtuous.
they're merely bad. They're not evil. They're merely bad.
Well, technically they're evil. They're bad and evil. But anyway, because women are evil and they're just bad and evil. So
Wait. Because
I'm trying to start something here. It's the female instinct that's bad, that's evil. Right? The problem is
they're intuitively evil.
right. And so what you see, and you're seeing this happen, is you're seeing the white male party become the Republicans, and the non-white and female party become the Democrats. Because that's the only result that can happen.
Yes.
And so the only thing,
the anti-white.
it's the anti-white brown and women movement. And for white women, for my interpretation is they believe their privilege will continue without white men. They're probably right. Well, they're right in the sexual market value. Matter of fact, they have higher sexual market value with non-white men than they do with white men. Right? That's true. Because the defection, especially for an unattractive or impulsive white woman, makes sense. And then you add the need for a female to conform to inconsistency of emotional experience that's gained from evasion of responsibility. You let that happen, and all of a sudden, what you've got is a majority of women either undermining or defecting.
A large quantity. I don't know if it's a majority, but yeah, a lot of them.
There's a lot of women that are, and they do it because they can't systematize. They literally can't think otherwise, which I think is fascinating. Because like I said, I can think like a woman for like maybe half a second, and I want to have a nervous breakdown, right? Because I just can't imagine how horrible it is to be that driven by impulsive emotions.
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. So I can empathize with the problem of being a woman. The way you do it, though, is you relieve them of the need to be responsible for that kind of cognition, or you limit the participation of women to those women who are capable of that kind of cognition.
So we talk about the men express their agency in capitalization.
Yes.
And the women express their agency through
hyperconsumption.
I would say it's like a generation of emotional consistency, you said a moment ago.
Well, but I mean, which thing are you asking? The generation of emotional consistency is the logical criteria for decidability in the female mind, right? Right. That's the intuitionistic criteria is conformity. Not as actually we say conformity is a positiva, but it's evasion of nonconformity. They're always trying to avoid. They're always trying to avoid. What can I consume while avoiding responsibility?
What can I consume while avoiding responsibility, right? Okay. So I'm just trying to process it into like how.
Even when they talk about their children, they're not reasoning about their children, they're feeling about their children.
Okay.
Even when they talk about their children versus others, they're trying to protect their children. They're not trying to make their children good.
Mm.
You know, so the trick is, how do you convert women from treating children as capital for the next generation again, instead of entertainment value like they're puppies? Because that's what they're doing. That's why we used to call it the pet generation. But the people who are millennials today, we said women were raising a pet generation.
Mm.
Their children are pets. They're not a means of ensuring your security in old age, nor are they means of preserving your property across generations, nor are they a means of fulfillment of social responsibility for continuation of the polity.
Mm.
Women have abandoned every kind of responsibility other than hyperconsumption.
Is that their responsibility?
That's what I said. Whenever this is again, I hate this stuff, right? Whenever I look at it, I'm like, but what is the motivating factor behind the female behavior? It's evasion of costs, not production of capital. If they produce capital, it's an accidental byproduct of it's terrifying. Now you just say to me, now I'm going to get the next all. Not all women. Well, of course not all women, you dumb fuck. Though it's
Didn't even occur to me to think that.
you know what I mean? No, I'm just saying, you used to do this to me too. I say you, the way you say you to me, which is both when we're referring to someone else as if we're in the conversation.
Right.
So you realize that all they're doing is fear. And their happiness is in some sort of hyperconsumption that allows them emotional dysregulation. When they can right, like men, we want emotional dysregulation, like by drinking and that kind of stuff, right? So we trash talk and do stupid shit and fight a little bit. Women want dysregulation too, but they want it through hyperconsumption. Now, like some of us, I'm thinking of one friend of mine, he goes fishing.
Right.
That's his version of hyperconsumption. For me, it's like brie cheese, some grapes, a nice Italian salami, and a glass of wine or scotch, and some fizzy ice water, and a book, or maybe a fire, right? That's it. Or my emotional dysregulation is, let's find 5 other nerds who want to talk about business, guns, technology, sex, right? The important things, the economics, right? And we want to go talk about those important things, and that's the emotional dysregulation. Girls want to go experience emotion. And it's actually really funny if you could do hidden cameras on any of your wags, wives and girlfriends, with their girls, and just listening to what they talk about. Absolutely fucking hysterical. It's content free from our perspective, but it's not emotionally content free from their perspective. Just like you and I want to exercise the muscles in our brains, they want to exercise those feelings. Same fucking thing. It's just like, that's misogynistic. No, it's accurate. I fucking love women. I mean, I'd have 10 if I could get away with it. Right? I love women. Women are fucking awesome. I just think women are very good in politics. Just like I don't want to get in there with you in the birthing room, and I don't want to argue with you about how to nurse your infants or keep them in line. I can't do it. I've tried. I suck at it. Right? I'm a good take the kid on a backpack for a walk to the store and come back, or to the bakery and come back, or in the park and come back. I'm good for those things. I'm good for all 3 of us or all 4 of us go for a hike in the woods with a kid, riding on my shoulders. But the mom shit of trying to keep track of what that fucking kid is doing about every 10th of a second,
Right.
I'd go mad. It doesn't seem like they even work at it. What's really funny though is with the minute they get in an emotional conversation with another woman and all that juicy emotional exercise is happening, their kids can like fall off a cliff, run across the road, run across the road, fall off a cliff, get hit by a car. Their kids can do anything because they're so enraptured by that female that they completely lose track of reality. Whereas I may not be able to concentrate on what that kid's doing every 5 minutes, but I will know if
he's out of bounds.
When he's out of bounds.
Good work.
So our whole experiment in trying to prove we're equal has produced the worst possible outputs, which is maybe not. Maybe at the end, if the end of this crisis, we're like, shit, men and women are really that different. This is the best we can do is reciprocity or whatever. We can restore institutions so we can cooperate at scale, and we can do these reforms, and everybody will be better off because we won't have to lie to each other or ourselves, right? That's fine. But I mean, I don't like the idea that we're doing is falsifying the virtue of women. I don't like it that what's happening is we're restoring the historical opinion of women as liars and whores. And
Babylon, baby.
that's what's
Babylon.
happening. Cheaters, liars, and whores. So I don't like that, and I really don't like it because I know how important the family is. So, you know, once you think women are fucking evil, how do you restore the family? Well, you do restore the Muslim family, maybe. I like women. I want a woman to be my peer, my best friend, my partner. I think women are fucking awesome.
There's a hidden caveat here. That's only half the equation.
Well, it's a different thing. It was like I get, it's like there's no caveat. It's like I love them, but that's like saying my kid. I love my kid. My kid is not a rocket scientist. Is that a reason not to love my kid? No, he's not a chess champ. You know, my daughter
Right.
one of my daughters is a mom.
Nice.
Right. The other one's a scientist. Right. I love them for being a mom and a scientist. I don't need them to be. They don't even like me anymore, right? Because I've gone down enough of this stuff. They don't. They're talking.
What?
They don't even like me now because I've done enough of this stuff that they're horrified.
What does that mean? They're horrified.
Well, they're what age are they? They're in their 30s. They're in their late 30s.
What is horrific? I don't understand horrified.
Because they don't have, they're not smart. They're not smart enough to understand what I'm talking about here. All they hear is the stuff I say about women.
That's too close to home, huh? Sacred cows.
I mean, all they do is prove my point.
That's it.
I love my son. I love my daughters.
Sure.
I don't have to have. And I love women.
I understand.
I love them.
We're in a difficult position here because we try to support the family in the face of this knowledge base, right?
Yes.
Understanding. It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
You know how easy it is for a guy my age. I'm sick.
I do.
Right? You know, you basically nobody thinks you're hitting on them anymore. So
makes it just a cakewalk.
It's a fucking cakewalk. Nobody thinks you're hitting on them. So you can. It does still happen. I have a friend. I was with a friend of mine a couple of months ago, and I think she might have thought I was hitting on her. Like, no, this is just me, right? So you can flirt with and play with and hug and do all this stuff, and they love it because the women, as they get older, they don't get the attention. So you just go make you make them happy, you make you happy, you make everybody feel good. We had a fire alarm the other day. I went out and collected hugs.
Nice.
I got like 80 hugs. That was like the day before yesterday. I got like 80 hugs. I even hugged the guys. It's like, so, that's, to me, that's what life is about. I got one other guy here who is, if I was normal, he's another one of those guys. I wish I was not autistic and I could just be a normal, happy family man with kids and a marriage, whatever. Right. And so I just love this guy. He's handsome. He goes to church like whatever all the time. He's like part of the church administration. He had a long career. He worked in the military. He's smart. We're politically on the same page. He's brutally honest. He has no anger. Right? It's just like things are just the way they are. And like we have great people, but the thing is, it's so much easier when you're older. Like I can say thank you, dear, to some girl who's 24, and she takes it the way I mean it,
Right.
right? And I have a thing about calling younger women princess. Yes, princess, what can I do for you?
Oh my.
They fucking love it. So you get to flirt and play and hug. They bring me cookies, they bring me dinner. They'll show up with a little fucking plate of dinner for me. We're thinking about you.
That's awesome.
So I mean, I love women. Women are fucking awesome. It's just like I don't want them in politics. I don't think we should even. I don't think we should. They should even know, right? It just makes them too crazy. They hate it.
It's a man job.
They just
Don't
hate
pay
it.
attention to this
Like,
sausage.
you don't understand. Politics isn't power. It's cleaning the fucking toilets. Well, actually, the septic tanks.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's what it's like. It's a proxy for violence.
That's right.
Right, and there's no place for women. So and they can't even, and just the stupid shit that comes out of people's mouths. I mean, the difference is when you get a Bernie Sanders, all right,
Right.
we know he's ridiculous.
Right.
Or he's ridiculous, right? And so we're like, it's okay. He'll find a following. They're guys. They'll eventually catch on, right? He's never going to go anywhere, right? Right. Well, you can have those guys. You can have like the Jesse Jacksons, right? You're gonna rile up the base, create a bunch of hate, whatever. But
Right.
So those Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton on one end, and
Oh my. Yep. Yep.
I think
Yep.
of Bernie, and who's that Asian guy that keeps talking? Yang, and on the other end. These people, but for men, we just think they're clowns. Right? You just don't take them seriously. That instinctually there's enough adult men around to say
That's not going to fly.
That ain't gonna work. It's a great idea. You're a good person. We'll give you a hug for thinking of it. But honestly, we're not paying for that shit, right? But the problem is you get these women up there, and for some reason we feel like they have privilege, or they're right, or we should protect them, despite that Pelosi is a fucking psychopath, and so is Ortiz Cortez, whatever her name is, Cortez, right? Elizabeth Warren.
Wait. I believe
these are people. People actually empathize with them because they're women, whereas men will look at a guy and say, "You're good intentioned." Like that's how I look at Bernie and Yang.
Yeah.
They're kind of stupid, but they mean well, right?
That's right. They don't know they know not what they do.
They do not know what they do, and there's enough of us grown-ups to keep them in check. The problem is once you get these crazy women, they can put enough people together through empathy, despite the insanity of what they're saying. And then they think we're evil for saying, that's not gonna fly. Oh, we're just adults. We're not evil.
Maybe the kids always hate the adults because they're being constrained by the adults, right?
Am I still sharing that screen?
Still showing the screen.
I can close that, right?
Yeah.
I I need a way to know what's being shown. Every other system of software I use seems to put too much burden on this computer.
Oh.
So I'm going to probably ask to raise a little money to buy an Institute box so that I can use one of the video. But anyway, I'm sure the guys will help me. They usually do. We had one guy terminate his it's been a long-term $100 a month guy.
Yeah.
And I put it through. I hate any implication that I don't do something, that I have So what happened was I deleted it in the software, his subscription, the software, but it didn't propagate to the,
Oh,
because you know those server problems I was having it was
oh, yeah,
timeout
yeah,
problems.
yeah.
So it was timing out. I
Okay.
still don't get any notification. It didn't send me an email or anything. And so it went through.
Oh, and it took $100.
He wasn't mad, but I mean, I had to refund it. It wasn't mad, but I mean, I'm like, I could see, I would get mad. And it's like, Jesus, it's like we're volunteers, right? It's just a couple of us and we're volunteers. We run this as volunteers. Anyway. So, where was I going? All right. So I took that down. I said, we're done with that. We've been on for 3 hours, which is sort of our limit.
I think so. I think it's reasonable, and I think we did good work. Was it interesting?
So, I didn't mean for us to take the whole time, but we just did so many good things there.
That's all right.
I was not, I'm still frustrated. I'm sort of out of it a little bit. I'm feeling a little better. So we should get back at lying, and I think we're going to finish it.
Very good.
All right.
That'll be our plan. I can meet on Wednesday, by the way.
Yes.
I took the day off, so we can meet at our normal time on Wednesday.
Okay. And after that, I think what I want to do is the part of the book that is least complete is the summary with all the triangles.
Yes.
Forms the center of the book.
Yes.
All right. So that's that's it. So I've got all the summary out there, and what I want to do is go through and make the images, the triangles for it, all the way through. And then I want to pull up, and once we've done that, I can probably do the triangles by myself, but I want to go over them all and correct them if any of them are wrong. And then what I want to do with you is go through the PowerPoint on one slide and the summary on the other.
Perfect.
And see what has to go this way. All right.
Perfect.
And at that point, no, I got to show you some other stuff. I forgot how much I'd written and how much was done. I forgot how much was done. It's really, it's gonna, when I look at it that way, it's like, okay, we got 3 books here.
It's like you're catching up, buddy.
Yeah, I know. Don't you can, and I'll even let you rub it in. Yes, Brad was right again.
Again,
Brad was right again.
It's all wonderful, Kurt. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, and you're gonna win too. I hate this. You're gonna win too.
How's that?
Because I'm not gonna. I don't want to make you feel that good.
I like winning.
I know you do. I'm gonna let you feel really.
You're gonna hold what?
Well, the science is one thing, right?
Yes, sir.
The Constitution is another thing.
Yes, sir. Uh-oh.
And the persecution is the prosecution.
Oh yes, that is distinctly different.
So we've got at least that. What's that? It's a possibility. Okay, so there's the history in there.
Yeah.
So I've done this huge historical piece. I know we're not going to get the prosecution in there. First of all, because you'll nag me out of it and you'll win. Because you'll be right, and I just will resist.
Nag me out of
I will resist.
like
I will resist you being right until the last moment that I can satisfy my ego.
There you go.
You know how honest I am about it, though? I'm honest about it.
If it pleases you, it's fine. However you want.
You know you're going to win. So
I do. I know. I have great confidence. I know how the world is operating, and it's like the water will conform. It'll be okay. It's okay.
So I can see the science and the history being together.
Yeah.
I can see the science and the law being together.
Okay.
I can see the science and the law really long and separate. Because I can see us writing the applications of the law.
Yes.
being really long.
Yes.
And I,
My thinking is this, the science,
that's
there's-
all, the
there's
science
two
and the
parts-
Constitution matter.
there's two parts of the science. And the first part of the science is the detail of how the science works.
Yes,
And the second part is the proof of all of the first principles, which
yes,
is the great details.
correct.
And that's that's the deep reference for people that are go-getters to go get.
Yes,
It's not necessary for them to understand all that and to even to go get it, because the first part of the science is sufficient to operate the law.
then I see the Constitution as its own thing. Because the preamble is actually the preamble and the introduction are basically a summary of the science. Right? You don't need to go all that nonsense, right?
That's right.
Right. And then you go through the Constitution, and that's your like, boom, there you go, there's your reforms. And that doesn't end up being like that. That ends up being
Right. You want to make a book so that it doesn't intimidate the person that wants to pick it up.
exactly. So there's some repetition there's some repetition of some basic principles, but they're summarized in the
Right. So they're freestanding pieces then.
inside the Constitution, inside the wood book of the Constitution.
That's it.
And then, on applied, like we could take, like I have, I don't know, 100 different applied examples.
Okay.
Even more across the spectrum from the individual to the political. They're the common ones that come up. And then there's the prosecution,
Yes.
and then there's the history. I might view the history and the science going together. That's probably the same. So you have the narrative, you have the method, the science, and the history. That seems to be a way to put it. But the amount I've written, I mean, it's fucking, I mean, you know this, but I kind of lost it over the past, year being sick. But holy shit, I can't believe how much I've written.
I'm impressed.
Well, you read the 400 pages, right? We didn't read the other 1,000.
I know. Thank God. The 400 pages was good.
The Constitution is going to be, 100 and something pages, right? I mean,
That's good. That's a good length.
that's all it needs to be. I don't think I looked at it last time and I said, well, 80, it's 80. That means it's going to be 100. And that's going to depend on how it's formatted, right? Like,
Correct.
I think most of it, it's like, my attitude is it should be somewhat ceremonial looking,
Yeah.
But I can see people wanting it in pocket form,
Right.
We need the posters, which essentially will be the output of our work on the summary. It's just way simpler. Really. I mean, you look at what I look at what I wrote in 14,
Yeah.
and it takes 30 pages to say what we now say in 2 paragraphs.
That's what we call wonderful parsimony.
All right, brother. I don't want. My nose is.
You're doing all right. Want to thank you again, Kurt. I want everybody to hit like, subscribe, notification, leave the messages.
All right.
Thanks, Kurt.
I'm gonna publish this one.
Very good.
Still send me the link from the earlier because I want to talk about that punch in the face stuff.
Oh, okay. I'll
All
send
right.
it to you.
I'll do that as a short.
Real good.
All right. Love you, brother.
All right.
Wednesday.
Bye, guys.